All right, it is now 6:05. We are calling the public session to order. Madam Clerk, would you have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Drew.
Here.
Councilmember Nickel.
Present.
Councilmember Perstock.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Here.
And Mayor Boyles is arriving. No. He's got to be a panelist.
Yep, I'm here. This is Drew. Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Mayor. We are joined by Pastor Rob McKenna from the Bridge, who will give the invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Councilmember Giroux. If you'd all please rise.
Let's pray. Lord, tonight I'm thinking about coming to the end of a year and, Lord, coming through our local elections. And, Lord, thankful for this city, thankful for what you've done this year. Lord God, thankful that you are leading us and guiding us. And so, Lord, we give thanks in all things, in the difficult situations that we face this year, Lord, and the good ones. And, Lord, going forward, Lord, we look forward to what you're going to do in this great city. And Lord, thank you for the new council that has been elected. Lord, thank you for a smooth transition as they transition in the new year. And Lord, thank you that we look forward to what you have. Good things, Lord. And Lord, as I always pray for protection over our city, Lord, that you guard and watch over our first responders, that you keep them safe in all that they do. Lord, that you're protecting our families, our kids in schools, the teachers, the administrators. Lord, that you're blessing our city workers. Lord, even those in this room, Lord, our city council, our mayor, the administrators, Lord, thank you for all that they do. Thank you, Lord, that you have put before them great things. And Lord, that their heart is to do things well. And so I pray blessing upon them. And Lord, we look forward to all that is ahead, and we give thanks, Lord God, for what you're doing. We pray this in your name. Amen. To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Giroux. Thank you, Pastor McKenna. First, we have a proclamation for the United Against Hate Week. Councilmember Nickel, would you like to read the proclamation, please?
Thank you, Mr. Pimentel. Accepting this proclamation is going to be DEI committee member Avery Smith. I'll have you come up so you don't have to stand there the whole time, after I speak, so you don't have to stand there the whole time I'm reading, but up to you. All right, so here we go. Proclamation. Whereas the United States is a nation of immigrants whose strengths come from its diversity, and whereas the Constitution enshrines equality on all individuals, regardless of race, gender, orientation, religion, or political views, and whereas Los Angeles County is home to a diverse population of more than 10 million residents, including Alaska Natives, American Indian, Asian Pacific Islanders, Black, Latinx, and White. United Against Hate Week, November 13th through November 19th, 2022, will celebrate LA County's diverse history, culture, and traditions, while educating residents on the importance of supporting social justice, inclusion, and safety for all. And whereas the goal of the week is to draw local residents, students, school, civic, faith, and business leaders together to raise awareness about how to stop hate and promote inclusion, United Against Hate Week recognizes the county's diversity, strengths, partnerships to help address hardships faced by victims of hate acts, and elevates every community and the unique ways they make the county a better, more inclusive and welcoming place to live. And whereas United Against Hate Week symbolizes El Segundo's dedication to preventing and opposing hate and intolerance in our community, and educating residents on the importance of compassion and cooperation as key strategies for unlocking, understanding, and embracing differences. Now therefore, the mayor and members of the City Council of the City of El Segundo, California, hereby proclaim support for the week of November 13th through November 19th, 2022 as United Against Hate Week, and express our dedication in preventing and opposing hate and intolerance in our community. And Mr. Smith is here to accept. Anything you'd like to say as a representative of the DEI committee?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind, I try never to miss the opportunity to say a couple words at least. I'm so thrilled to be able to accept this on behalf of the DEI Committee for United Against Hate Week. And yeah, just wanted to say a couple words. You know, we live in very difficult times. You know, we have a pandemic that's been raging for 3 years. We've had a lot of social, cultural unrest, and the country's incredibly divided. And, I was a history major at UC Irvine, and when I think about the times that we really looked at and analyzed, it was these really difficult times. And, not just historians will look at this time, but it'll be our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and they will ask themselves, right, did Papa, did Grandma, did Nana stand united against hate? And I hope that answer is yes for everybody. And, hate comes in many forms. It can be the racial slur. It can be the swastika engraved in a bathroom stall. It can be many, many forms. But the reality is we tend to look at hate and love as binary. We tend to look at apathy and passion as binary. But the reality is there's a spectral nature to hate. And it's not just, again, the racial slur or the person driving down the street that cuts you off. There are many forms. And the forms that I want to talk about really quickly tonight that I think are impactful, especially for the DEI committee that we have faced, is misinformation. And, that also comes in many forms. And unfortunately, recently, that has infected the city. And I think that, it is our responsibility to stand up against that. And it is our responsibility to educate folks what DEI really means. Because, DEI is a trendy, it's a new label, but the reality is that the ideals are old, tried, and true, right? I think about DEI and some of the terms and some of the thoughts. They're as old as the scriptures. If you look back to the 18th century, right? I take you back to 8th grade history class. What was the phrase that the colonists said, right? When they were seeking independence, no taxation without representation, right? That's the DEI statement. That is a statement that says, hey, if you're going to take money out of my pocket, I want to be able to represent myself and say, and be able to dictate what's going on, right? A century later, if you look at Abraham Lincoln, right? What did he say? A house divided against itself will not stand. That is a statement of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So DEI, new label, right? But the theories, the values, tried and true, right? I think about a century later, this young Baptist preacher walking up to the stage, to the podium, August 28th, 1963. What's the first thing Martin Luther King says during his I Have a Dream speech? He says, I have a dream. It is deeply rooted in the American dream that all people are created equal. So again, DEI, new label, right? Tried and true values and statements. And so I leave you with that. I'm thrilled again to be able to accept this proclamation because DEI is top down, and I'm very fortunate, and the city of El Segundo is very fortunate to have leaders to take this step. So thank you very much.
And now, tomorrow night, there's a candlelight vigil or something, correct?
Yes, there is.
For anybody watching or the Herald who might print this?
Yeah, absolutely. So it starts at 4:30. We are led by our new chairperson, Cristina Vasquez Fajardo. So we're excited to have this candlelight vigil, and that's going to be from 4:30 to 5:30 at City Hall. We have some amazing speakers, and I'm really just looking forward to the community coming out and the fellowship and all that good stuff. So yeah, very excited.
Oh, thank you. You guys want to get a photo down front?
Yeah, absolutely.
Christina, you as well?
All right. Okay.
Very good. A couple of photos, guys. One, two, one more. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right, moving on to public communications. Madam Clerk, do we have any?
I have one card so far. Mona Eisman.
Ms. Eisner, you have 5 minutes today. We have 30 minutes allocated for public communications, so each speaker gets the full 5 if they'd like it.
Madam Clerk, is Ms. Eisman not speaking regarding the short-term housing?
I am Mayor Boyle, sorry.
Excellent point.
We
Would
have-
you like
we
to
have
wait for
public
the,
hearing for that.
I would.
for the public comment for that?
May I?
Yes, you may, absolutely.
Thank you.
Anyone else with public communication not related to an agenda item for the public hearings? Very well. We'll move to procedural motions. Can I have a motion to read all ordinance and resolutions on the agenda by title only?
So moved.
Second. Do we have to say our last name because the mayor's not here?
Councilmember Giroux,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Perstock,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
And Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0.
Motion passes. On to the consent calendar for items 2 through 5. Do we have any pulls?
Nichols so moved.
Pimentel, second.
I'm not going to give him a chance.
Councilmember Giroux,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Perstock,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
And Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
Consent passes 5-0.
All right, cruising into item 6. This is the time and place here to fixed for a public hearing regarding a resolution adopting the revised 2021 to 29 housing element, the 6th cycle. City Clerk, was proper notice of the hearing given in a timely manner?
Yes, it was.
City Clerk, has any written communication been received regarding this public hearing?
None.
Okay, the public hearing is now open. Mr. George, I suspect Mr. Allen will be giving the presentation.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, Community Development Director Michael Allen will do this presentation.
Mr. Allen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council. I will be introducing our consultant who will actually give tonight's presentation, Veronica Tam, who, as you might be familiar, if you recall, in 2021, we had several conversations about the housing element for the 6th cycle session between 2021 and 2028. City Council did adopt the housing element in February of 2022. We submitted that document to HCD, which is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, who reviewed the document for the second time and gave us some feedback later on in April. Since April, staff has been working with the consultant team and HCD to revise and address HCD's comments and questions to make sure that we've completely satisfied what they're looking for in our housing element. And so tonight we're here before you to present those modifications and address any questions that the council might have. And so with that, I will introduce Veronica Tam, who can walk us through those revisions.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I'm going to do this. Thank you for the opportunity, and certainly it's an important process of the housing element update. As you are probably aware, this round of the housing element update is exceptionally difficult for a lot of jurisdictions, particularly in Southern California. We did receive a very large RENA entirely as a region, and there's been a lot of state law changes that makes the housing element update much more difficult. When we did the housing element update, we went through a whole process of community outreach, and then we presented the draft housing element before the Planning Commission and the City Council before we submitted that to the state. And the state had the opportunity to look at it and give comments. As of right now, today, there's still less than half of SCAG that have a certified housing element. So we're in the middle of the pack. We're working towards that goal, but a lot of communities are doing exactly the same thing. I think the last time I checked last week is less than 50% so far still. What we are hoping to do tonight is, with your approval of the housing element, that we can, as revised, so we can move on to the HCD for the certification process. When we sent the adopted housing element to the state for review, one of their main concerns is a new state law is affirmatively furthering fair housing. The main comment is that they want the city to show more coordination efforts with the regional fair housing services in order to provide fair housing in the community. They also want us to talk a little bit more about the historical trend and patterns in the city, but most importantly, provide more meaningful actions with specific target dates and schedule and outcome that you would pursue over the next 8 years. Another key comments on the state, and this is exactly the same reason why the majority of jurisdictions in the SCAC region are still stuck, is that it's a very high bar to meet the site inventory, to meet the regional housing needs allocation. We have to look at realistic capacity and how likely the site will be redeveloped over the next 8 years. So that's really the kind of focus of their comments for the city of El Segundo and also for the majority of the jurisdictions that are still struggling with the housing element. Regarding the other comments is constraints, that particularly in relation to development standards, especially when as part of the strategies the city has of meeting the RENA is to increase densities in certain properties. So they want to make sure that your development standards are going to be appropriate to facilitate the development of those. So the key changes we have made to this revised housing element is a strategy to meet the regional housing needs allocation. We reduced the size of the mixed-use overlay, but we did increase the density because a lot of developers are coming in and say that the projects may need to be a little higher density based on one of your most recent projects, the Pacific Coast Common project. It comes in about 80 units to the acre. We also removed some sites based on the updated status of those projects that we didn't think that we would be able to convince HCD that it would be reduced, we would be redeveloped over the next 8 years. But as directed by City Council, the concept of expanding the housing overlay to the R3 zone, particularly including portions of the area that include some kind of non-conforming uses, and the density we have identified, the staff has identified 60 to 70 units to the acre based on R3 multifamily study conducted by another consultant. So those are the key changes that we made to the site's inventory. And so regarding the mixed-use overlay, you can see that it primarily focuses on just 3 areas, and the sites that we are looking at definitely are based on developer-owned interests or also existing conditions that we feel are more convincing to the state with higher density. Relating to the housing overlay, the brown colors is all the R3 properties in the city, but the overlay only covers about half of the R3 properties. Having said that, we don't expect the entire overlay would actually turn over the next 8 years. What we have done is to, based on the overlay, we eliminated properties that are unlikely to turn over, that primarily that has already apartments on it, or condominiums that are not going to be easily or financially feasible to turn over. We also looked at properties that may be too small, that they would not be, when somebody redeveloped, they're not going to yield a high enough kind of net increase to make it financially feasible. So again, for the sites inventory, to meet the RENA, we focus on primarily a few properties that either have developer or property owner interest, or they are currently non-conforming older industrial uses that may be more appropriate to be turned over as residential uses when they're already located in a multifamily residential zone. So with those changes, we would be able to meet the regional housing needs allocation. The overlay, the housing overlay would probably provide about 330 units in capacity, the mixed use another 300 and something units. We do have some kind of like a surplus because we have to be very realistic that when properties are developed, we're not going to get 100% affordable projects. It's unlikely that we'd get 100% affordable projects. So we do have to get a bigger above moderate income capacity in order to get to more of a lower income capacity. So, but essentially, this is the major change to the housing element. Affirmatively furthering fair housing comments that we got from the state, we now have created a new summary table of meaningful actions that we looked at all the housing element programs that may have beneficial impacts on providing fair housing. And that strategy of summarizing it in a table, we have tested it with other jurisdictions and worked out quite well with other jurisdictions. We also did add some detailed actions that the city will undertake to further fair housing. So with that, we're certainly hoping that we can take public comments, and with your permission, we adopt the housing approval of the housing element. We can resubmit the housing element to the state. They have another 60 days to look at a adopted housing element. But during that 60 days, we're hoping that we would be able to meet with the state during the 60-day. And if there are any more additional concerns, we can address it during the 60 days. So by the end of the 60-day, we'll get a certified housing element. And for that reason, the state actually recommends that, if possible, to provide for council to delegate authority to your community development director to make technical revisions to the housing element after the adoption if the state have some additional requests for information. In that case, we wouldn't have to keep coming back to the city council. That's a recommended strategy from the state, and I think it's included as part of the resolution for the adoption. So with that, I conclude my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any question you may have.
Director Allen, anything further from you?
No, that's it from staff.
Okay, the public hearing is now open for public input. Bracing turnout for that. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Persick, so moved.
Second.
Councilmember Drew,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel,
Yes.
Mayor Boyles,
Yes.
closed by vote.
All right, we are open to council discussion. Who'd like to lead us off? Mr. Nichol?
I'll open it.
There we
So
go.
this went to the planning committee on the 27th. What was their feedback?
Planning Commission recommendation was for approval. There was some dialogue related to the site's inventory and the updated affirmatively furthering fair and affordable housing. But otherwise, there were no recommended changes to the document itself.
In the presentation of the Planning Commission, was there any visual aids provided with regards to what that density per acre actually looks like?
The same presentation tonight was made to the Planning Commission. You'll see a presentation later tonight specific to that R3 study that does have some imagery. It's
Of what?
part of a different.
What is it per acre? Are we
We're
pushing to?
We're looking at least our recommendation to HCD is somewhere between 60 to 75 units or 65 to 75 units to the acre.
Got it. Now, I mean, most our parcels are less than an acre, typically in size. So do we just take that and divide by the square footage, or how do we?
There's several next steps as part of, and this will again be part of another presentation tonight, but there'll be several next steps that we need to effectuate that increase in density. So we would need to look at several development standards in order to accommodate that type of density. That could be lot coverage, lot consolidation, increase of minimum lot sizes, building height, parking regulations, setbacks. We need to look at that from a broader spectrum to figure out what is the right combination to achieve that type of density while minimizing the other potential impacts that the community might feel or be concerned about with that type of density.
Now, are there any pitfalls to taking this to HCD prior to having that framework built? I guess my only concern is HCD says, oh, great, fantastic, here, we're going to certify your housing element. Fantastic. And then we go back and, we create a subcommittee and we decide that, okay, yeah, like we still in those dense areas, we do not want the height to exceed this, we don't want this, we don't want that. Is there any potential landmine that we're then going to step in and HCD is going to say, no, you cannot limit that because we've already approved your housing element based upon that density.
Yeah, the overall implication is that that affects our sites inventory and allocation of how we're accommodating the RENA allocation, or the number of units that we have to demonstrate capacity to build. And so theoretically, if that number is lower, then that reduces the theoretical capacity of our RENA sites. And so, as Veronica mentioned, we do have a cushion, about 50% overall, that as the properties are developed, or if that number is lower, there's a little bit of a cushion to absorb some of that. But the overall implication is that we might have to revisit the site's inventory.
Okay, but we could not find ourselves in a situation where we are now married to what we are certifying.
I think if we, yeah, go ahead.
Typically, even though we all feel that the state has come down with a lot of control over like land use issues, but they still maintain that the local jurisdictions have the freedom to do development standards and all of that. I think the main thing is when you adopt your R3 zoning development standards, you need to make a finding that what you are committed to is consistent. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it's consistent with the commitment that you've made in the housing element, that you have the ability to actually meet the regional housing needs allocation. So if for some reason that your development standards is such that it's limiting or lowering your capacity, you still have to have enough capacity to meet the RENA. You need to be able to make that finding when you adopt the new R3 standards that you believe, as in the city of El Segundo, that you've made the changes that's consistent to your commitment and that allows you to comply with state law to meet the RENA. But it doesn't mean that you have to do exactly the same amount. So,
but yeah, you are potentially hemming in the city on this issue because, as she said, you can make some adjustments, but if you were significantly off, making significant adjustments would be problematic. Now, it's not impossible, but that's the point of this process, is to get a housing element certified. They're looking at certain sites. They're very well staffed. They're looking in a very detailed manner at what's being put in front of them by all the cities. Now, it doesn't mean they might not accept an amendment to what you're doing, but if you go back and make significant amendments to where you're no longer going to hit those numbers, that's a problem.
I guess, it's the unintended consequences of our choices. You know, there's a reminder on the 500 block of Main Street. You know, how many 3-story buildings are on Main Street? Can anyone tell me? There's one, right? There's one. And how that came to be, right, was a nuance in the code that then we couldn't stop that from happening once it happened. And so I guess my fear in this is just understanding what that modeling is. What is that, how tall is that many units per acre, right? Just from like a practical standpoint. Because it sounds good, because in the past, like, we used to rubber stamp these housing elements. It would come before the planning commission, stamp, council stamp, go to HCD, and yep, no problem. You probably experienced that in your previous job, right? It's pretty straightforward. But now, I feel like the state is much harsher, and they're like, well, no, you have to prove that you can build these. And so I just don't want us to find ourselves in a situation where now we certify it, it goes to the state certifies it, and then someone comes in and they say, okay, well, to have that density in this location, I need to build 50 feet. And it's like, whoa, you can't build 50 feet. And then they take it before HCD, and HCD says, well, no, like that's your density. That's your allowable density. So yeah,
It's understood, and it's a valid point. I think the proof will be in the recipe and how we craft our R3 standards, in the development of objective standards that hold the values and the aesthetics that we prefer in the development typology. That's where we can exercise and flex our control.
And there's no time gap between the two?
A time gap between which two?
Like, say HCD approving, like if we approve this tonight and it gets sent to HCD and they approve it, and then us approving our R3 standard.
Just because it's in the housing element, you can't actually develop the density until we get that code amendment. Okay. So that's going to take another half a year or so for us to do so. And we've had conversations with HCD about this specifically. They're comfortable with this strategy.
Okay.
They've looked at the R3 study. They understand that there's a next step that the city has to take in order to effectuate that change. At the end of the day, HCD's ultimate goal is let's build more housing. And this is a tool to do so. So we have to demonstrate that we can do that, but we still have the ability to flex objective design standards to maintain a development typology that we prefer.
Thank you. I was going to agree with Councilmember Nichol in one regard that it is useful to have imagery because 68 units per acre doesn't resonate. You know, an acre is awkwardly 16 square chain, which is a measurement that no one uses. It's like, what is it, 40,000 square feet for 68 units. It's just tough to conceptualize. So I think that having something that shows us, because people, we get asked about this all the time, about density and development, and telling people, well, it's going to be about 75 units per acre doesn't necessarily resonate. There's another term of art that I think it might be useful for the people at home. When you say an overlay, can you define for people watching at home what we mean by residential overlay?
Yeah, so the overlay zone, and so we can go back maybe a slide just to make it illustrative. So overlay zone, or overlay on a zone, is identifying a specific area in an existing zone so that has different standards or is subject to different standards than the rest of the zone. So as illustrated in this image here, the brown areas are all R3, but the brown area with blue hash would be our overlay zone. It's a portion of the entire, it's a portion of the R3 zone that we're identifying for as an overlay zone. And so it will be subject to different standards than the rest of the R3.
Thank you. I think that people, because they hear an overlay, and I think the last time we had a big discussion on the overlay was when we did Smoky Hollow East and preserved some of the residential overlay on that. So I wanted to make sure that they weren't like, hey, where's that overlay that we battled for at Kansas and Grand? I would also ask if will we have any issue, and I presume that this is a softball question. We had questions before if we were putting portions of our housing element that we thought would assuage the concern for arena number, but was within the noise contour of LAX, that would run afoul of an environmental standard, that we were satisfying arena number in a place that was environmentally sensitive. Is that concern valid any longer? Because I see the Imperial sites on here.
I don't believe it's a concern. In fact, a lot of the maps that HCD has produced has identified the west quadrant of the residential area of the city as some of the most resource-rich area of the city, as well as the northeast quadrant of the city. And so our entire residential area is designated as a resource-rich area. I don't think there's a disqualification for environmental concerns.
Good. I know that was a bit of a concern before when we talked about some of our most densely populated areas that we thought would be key for potential overlay in the past, that there was some concern we'd run afoul of that. The one last piece that I would throw in is I am, and I don't know how my colleagues feel, a little bit averse to fully delegating out the ability to make technical reviews because the devil in those details sometimes can have, to Councilmember Nichols' point, some far-ranging unintended consequences. So obviously, I don't know near as much about this as you do, and so I'm not besmirching your intentions, but I think we're up here to filter through some of the far-ranging consequences of some small technical modifications, and I would caution us against that, would be my 2 cents. But any further comments? Or Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments? Councilmember Drew?
Yeah, on what you just talked about on the technical thing and giving you a little bit of latitude, I would have to imagine that if there was anything major that came up that was going to significantly change the scope of what this is, that you'd bring it up.
If we're looking at changing density or some of the really, if the council wanted to identify other major components, we would certainly escalate it and bring it back to commission or council. But what we're talking about is the editorial changes,
language.
the HCD, the language that's being used. If there's a deliverable, that we're committing to, it's already in there, but if they want the deliverable to be spelt out a little bit better, we're talking about those types of editorial changes.
All right, so based on that, I have no problem giving you that latitude because I think we're talking about, a lot of it is basically language on documents.
We could spell it out further if there's, it would give a better,
I know, what I'm getting to is that the problem we have here is that if we don't want to get on the radar and have a big bullseye painted on our forehead, we need to get through this. So the more we have to delay and come back in 60 days and then have another council meeting and then go through another 60 days, the further we are down the road. My concern is now we become a target. If you're at 50% right now and then all of a sudden within 60 days that's 75% and we're still in the 25%, I feel that becomes problematic. So that's my concern.
So with your request,
Hey, Mayor Pro Tem, I was late coming off mute. I think staff did a great job capturing the concerns to address HCD and get this done. So I'm good with what's been presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Persick?
yeah, so with the request to make the edits, does that also mean to not bring it to the planning commission?
that's correct.
So, you know, I'm gonna kind of lean toward Mayor Pro Tem that I think there needs to be some oversight. Even if it just doesn't come to us, at least it goes to the planning commission for some review.
This is nothing personal.
Personal
We've had a few issues in the past, in the era preceding you, where some things have snuck through.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
So that decision's not, it's like Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, it's not about the individual, it's about the process. And I feel that one of the good things about having it either come to the planning commission as well as then the council is it brings attention to it in the public. Because if it's done independently, then the public doesn't see it, and it's something that the public needs to be participating in.
Councilmember Nichol, your comments?
What did the mayor say regarding that point?
It seemed as though he was fine delegating.
Okay.
Is what it sounded like.
Yeah,
and
just
I,
to clarify, I'm fine with the way it's been.
and I think one of the questions I would have for the city attorney. Sorry, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
If I may,
I was just clarifying that, yes, I'm fine with the way it was written in the staff report, which is to rely on the staff to make that call.
I want to clarify that, so that make sure I think we're all clear, is that the map itself and that's not going to change. There are pages and pages and pages of verbiage that on detail issues that are, I think what we're talking about is those kind of things, and it's a bit peculiar how HCD wants certain verbiage that really you look at and really not much of a difference. But and ultimately the council will have to adopt and implement these changes. So there's no ability for them to go and say, well, we're going to take this property, actually it'll be over there now, and those kind of things. But again, it is your call. I just want to make it clear that it's not like they can make any changes to this map or the big details of what's occurring here. There's literally like hundreds of pages that go in this submittal.
We had hundreds of pages of a submittal a few years ago.
Yeah,
Deep in them was a
I do
$600,000 grant
remember.
to put housing on aviation. So I
do
want to
remember.
make sure
I do
that
remember.
on page 599 C12, you know, that,
I do remember that.
yeah.
if I
Go
may
ahead, sorry.
clarify something though, with the ability to, with the authority to delegate, then the HCD, if they want technical changes, will make the revisions, and you would not have to re-adopt the housing element. And so that would be, you know, you'll be certified and your housing element can be just make those minor changes and you move on. If you don't have that delegation of authority, then any revisions that you make after the adoption tonight would be considered a requirement to re-adopt the housing element. So that would requires that the a 7-day public review before it goes back to HCD again. But the important thing I wanted to mention is, if that is the case, then I would recommend that you be the body to review it rather than the planning commission, because you have to re-adopt the housing element. So it's easier. So it's better to skip the planning commission and go straight to the city council, because going back to the planning commission would not be adequate as a re-adoption of the housing element.
Can I ask one last question before I torture this to death, and I don't mean to? if we just simply compiled the summary of all the changes they request that we make, so if we delegate this authority and you make a series of changes and you collate those and we get those in a report, and if we look at them and if we see something glaring, are we allowed to unadopt our housing element?
You
I mean,
have
conceivably?
you have to readopt anyway if you don't have that delegation.
No, if we delegated it and you
Okay.
compiled and said, hey, here are the 34 changes that we made, and we look at them, we're like, oh, 33 of these are great, the 34th one, involves turning Rec Park into a tower.
Can I ask, I'm a little confused on this. So you're saying that staff could make changes to what gets adopted tonight, and then that wouldn't be changing the plan, but if these minor changes get brought back to the planning commission, then it has to be readopted?
Well, no, if we make technical changes after, tonight is an adopted housing element. We submit an adopted
Right.
housing element to the state for their review. If they come back and say, can you do this a lot sooner than, a little sooner than, 2025, can you do it in 2024, that type of changes. If the staff has the authority to make those changes, we can go ahead and make it, and your housing element is considered adopted with technical revisions. That's it. We don't have to resend it to HCD. We don't have to readopt the housing element. If staff does not have the ability to make those changes, any changes we make to tonight's adopted housing element would be considered a revision to the housing element. It becomes a draft again. And so it would needs to go back to HCD for another review of a draft and readoption by the city council. Now, I do have cities that don't do the delegation authority, but they do skip going back to the planning commission. So if they come back with the additional revisions, it goes straight to the city council.
My question would be, just, let's say we delegate authority, say, go ahead, we commit, this is submitted, you make some technical revisions, it gets submitted, they agree, we agree,
Right.
and you give us, a 3-page sheet of all the technical changes, and we look at it and we see one that to us looks terrible, like we hate it. What's our recourse?
Well, and I think you have the ability to readopt the housing element by telling us you don't like it, and
Even after it's been adopted, we can
Yes.
re-adopt the adopt.
You can, but there are consequences to all of that, so I'm just, that's what I'm thinking as you're talking here. This is, this doesn't really make sense, but that's sort of consistent with this overall process. So I don't, I'm not gonna argue that she's wrong, it's HCD in these weird or peculiar ways that they do things. It doesn't make sense that this really couldn't go back to the commission without having to readopt it, but the staff could do that. That doesn't make any sense to me.
it's the way that they've been.
I understand.
Yeah. So I think the only reason why I mentioned that is I think Councilman Nickel mentioned about going back to the planning, at least going back to the planning commission. Going back to the planning commission is not a readoption, so it doesn't fulfill the requirement of readopting the housing element. That's the reason. That's the only reason why I'm suggesting, if you want to go back, it should go back to the city council and skip the planning commission. Then you kind of expedite the process a little bit. That's the only reason why I'm suggesting that. But if there are changes that we made in response to HCD comments, maybe what we can do is present that as director's report or something like that, and if you like it, then nothing has to change. If you don't like it, I will explain which ones are critical for certification, which ones are not critical for certification. Then at that point, you can decide whether you want to kind of reopen the process or not.
Well, that's still then having
I
meetings
think-
and whatnot, so.
Okay.
I mean,
I think I can just put this to bed and we can move forward, right? Because it's 2-2, right?
Well, what I would say is though, that I would just ask, can we just have a summary of any technical changes that are
Yeah,
made? That's all I would ask.
I think, my read on this is grant authority. Michael Allen and his team have a clear picture as to what scares us, what doesn't scare us, what we are willing to accept, and what we will knock down his door. Okay? Yes. Yes. No, he did though. That's why he's on this council, because he read page 600. No, but so my thought is, grant staff the ability to do this, because I think of HCD like the old planning department. You submitted plans for review. They give you 3 corrections. You do those 3 corrections and you give those back immediately. And you get your stamp and you never come back, right? Because if you don't, you're like, oh, well, all right, I gotta go back, and we gotta look at this, and okay, I'm gonna resubmit. That staff's gonna go, oh, well, let's start on page 1, and they're gonna start all over, and then they're gonna come back with 5 new corrections for you. And so I would say, I would love for our staff to have the ability to make those couple changes and get out the door of HCD as quickly as humanly possible. And if for some ungodly reason, there is something on page 600 that we don't like, we could amend our housing element. We can bring it back, staff can bring it back, we can amend it, and then go from there. But I think that we go the route, and so, yeah, you got Councilmember Giroux, the mayor, and myself saying that Michael Allen.
We don't count votes.
I'm counting.
So I think the city manager has one comment.
No, I just wanted to add, Mayor Pro Tem, I mean, when you say staff authority, I mean, that will also include the city manager and the city attorney in conjunction with our community development director. So,
And then to Mayor Pro Tem's point, it would be great to get the summary for any changes, so we don't have to read the whole
Yes.
thing again.
right.
That's heard.
As long as it doesn't include the term acre feet. Okay. All right, city attorney.
What do you need? Do you need like a motion or?
No, right now, the city attorney will read the resolution by title only.
Yes, council, a resolution of the city council approving an environmental assessment number E81271 and adopt general plan amendment number 19-04, parenthetical 2021-2029 housing element, close parenthetical, to amend the housing element of the El Segundo general plan is ready for adoption.
Do I have a motion to adopt an appropriation?
So moved.
Nichols, second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
I'll go yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
And Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Veronica Tam and her staff, Jamie Powers, who's not here, I don't think, but also Paul Samaras, our principal planner, and Eduardo Schomborn, our planning manager, who have all worked tirelessly over the last 2 years now, probably plus, on this. And so they deserve a great deal of gratitude and from myself and from the city. We're tremendous effort from Paul, especially being the project lead from staff. So thank you, Paul, Veronica, and Eduardo.
Thank you all very much. It's almost time to get started on the 7th cycle, which will be coming right around the corner. All right, item 7. This is the time and place heretofore for a public hearing regarding, the ordinance to amend the El Segundo Municipal Code Title 13 to adopt by reference with certain local amendments, Parts 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and 11 of the 2022 California Building Standards Code, the 2021 International Property Maintenance and Swimming Pool and Spa Codes, and the 2021 Uniform Solar Hydronics and Geothermal Code. City Clerk, was proper notice of the hearing given in a timely manner?
Yes, it was.
City Clerk, are any written communications been received regarding this public hearing?
None thus far.
The public hearing is now open. Mr. George, who will make this presentation?
Yes.
Director Allen, once again?
Yes, since Mr. Allen did such a fine job on that last item, Mayor Pro Tem will keep him up at the podium.
Director Allen, I have 74 questions on this. I will go right ahead,
Thank you,
please.
Mr. George. I have no invigorating presentation tonight. We gave the presentation 2 weeks ago, but I myself, the building official, and our consultant who helped prepare the amendments are here tonight if there's any follow-up questions from 2 weeks ago.
The public hearing is now open for public input. Any speakers on this item? There are not. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0 close.
Do we have any council discussion? I will remind everyone that this was passed on November 1st.
The ordinance was introduced. When an ordinance is adopted by reference, which is what this is, it's done in a reverse process. Again, it doesn't really make sense, just the way it's done. So you introduced it at the last meeting, and now you're having the public hearing. And it'll still be a second read where you would adopt it. The resolution was adopted at the last meeting, so that doesn't need to be dealt with, just the second read of the ordinance and adoption of that this evening.
So we already deliberated and voted.
You voted on the resolution, you introduced the ordinance, now tonight is the adoption of the ordinance. The resolution dealt with local changes to the ordinance, and the ordinance tonight, it will be the second read.
Do we all need to wear a funny hat? I mean, this is...
You know, it's just a quirky state law thing, so I need to read the title and you need to adopt the ordinance.
Do we have any discussion on this, as we're under the 1854 protocol of...
No, I just wanted to reiterate that this is to keep us to code to the California standards.
That's
right.
correct, with the
So-
exception of the items that we adopted, or that we discussed at the November 1st meeting where we made those modifications unique to El Segundo.
Right.
And I just wanted to remind, Mark, if you can clarify, I believe we do have to open a public hearing for this tonight.
We did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Okay,
we did.
I'm sorry, I missed
They
it.
did, and they closed
And we even closed it. But we did it in reverse. Close up and read. It's like Mork and Mindy. All right, is there any further council discussion? I know we belabored the fire safety portion of this to a degree.
The two amendments that we had discussed last time are put in there. So with regards to the seismic shutoff valve, the threshold is no longer 10,000, it's now 250,000. And the fire suppression sprinklers now, it falls under the same kind of umbrella concept that our staff has followed for many years, which is new construction is considered, a whole new building or anything that requires the removal of more than 50% of the existing exterior walls. So many times people will leave up half the house and build a new house around it. It is not considered new construction, so fire suppression sprinklers are still only going to be required in new construction, essentially, by that rule, by staff, which I feel it's a fair compromise, and I hope the fire inspector and marshal believes that is still going to keep our citizens safe, healthy, and happy without overburdening them.
Very well. Any further council discussion? City Attorney, would you please read the ordinance by title only?
Yes. Council, an ordinance adopting the 2022 edition of the California Building Code, 2022 California Residential Code, 2022 California Electrical Code, 2022 Mechanical Code, 2022 California Plumbing Code, 2022 California Energy Code, 2022 California Fire Code, 2022 California Historical Building Code, 2022 California Existing Building Code, 2022 California Green Building Standards Code, 2021 International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, 2021 International Property Maintenance and Code, 2021 Solar Hydronic and Geothermal Code, with certain appendices and amendments and amending the El Segundo Municipal Code reflect such adoption is ready for adoption.
Do I have a motion to waive the second reading and adopt the ordinance?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Drew.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0.
All right, the motion passes. We are on to item 8. This is a time and place heretofore fixed for a public hearing. To waive the first reading and introduce an ordinance for environmental, I got the right one. To the ordinance for environmental assessment number 1180 and zone text amendment number 2201, amending Title 4, Chapter 16, the home sharing permit, and Title 15 zoning regulations, the El Segundo Municipal Code, to find the ordinance is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to 14 California Code Regulations, Section 15306, and permanently allow short-term housing rentals in the city's residential zones through a short-term home sharing permit. City Clerk, was proper notice of the hearing given in a timely manner?
Yes, it was.
City Clerk, has any written communication been received regarding this public hearing?
Yes. It's been posted on the website.
It is posted on the website, very well. The public hearing is now open. Mr. George, who will make this presentation?
Yes,
Director
well,
Allen once again?
You can tell that our community development department's been very busy lately, and yes, we'll turn it over to Mr. Allen.
Mr. Allen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Like previous presentations, I'll be introducing Eduardo Schomborn, our planning manager, who will be providing a reported update on the year-long pilot program that we are wrapping up this month and next month. Before it expires, we are recommending a permanent adoption, and so Eduardo's here to walk through the findings and our recommendation moving forward.
Great, thank you, Michael. Good evening, Mayor. So to walk the council through a little bit down memory lane, this particular item had come before the commission and council, started as early as 2016-ish. During between 2017 and 2020, as you could tell, it went through a numerous amount of public hearings, both with the commission and the council. A variety of methods were contemplated to deal with short-term rentals. I think over that time, the South Bay and just across the nation, worldwide, you had Airbnb was the big name on the block and really set the tone for these short-term rentals. And throughout the years, this, or at least early on in the 2016-ish, when it was just a mushrooming of these short-term rentals, a lot of cities were trying to figure out what to do, and we were one of them. Obviously, we worked in concert with the COG, met with our other colleagues in other cities. A lot of cities went from banning it, to allowing it without restrictions or regulations. Others tried to have regulations in terms of just home shares, and at least with regards to what we contemplated, there was some contemplation for banning, and some others contemplated approving them. Ultimately, what we had landed on after hearing at the council, after hearing from the community, and figuring the least amount of impacts was to try to do a home share process. And so, by definition, home sharing is what? It's first of all, it's short term. It's for a period of 30 consecutive days or less. And specifically for home sharing, the council wanted to see, okay, you know what? Let's look at it where you have the property owner who lives on site, because as some of the council members may recall, some folks who did come to speak on this item, they had a lot of good experiences because there was the property owner who lived on site. So that really minimized a lot of the impacts that we were seeing, nationwide or with regards to party houses. And so that really minimized the impacts. And I think it kind of, set a tone for the council to say, you know what, let's look at this. And so ultimately what the council decided is let's look at this in terms of having a pilot program. And so that's what we did. We implemented a 15-month pilot program. Although this was approved back in 2020, what happened in 2020? The pandemic. So we had to put a halt on that. So the actual implementation of this 15-month pilot program didn't commence until 2021. October 1, 2021 is when we first started this. And what did we do? So from a staff's perspective, we looked at we had a firm kind of help us out with identifying a lot of these short-term rentals, home sharing. We got the word out even beforehand. We had a website dedicated for home sharing. Really got the word out in terms of sending notices to those that we had identified as advertising on the city's website. And so we ended up having these folks go through this process. What does this process entail? So it entails submittal of the home share permit application. What do we look for? We look to verify information that it is the property owner that's applying for this, because the home share permit is being issued to the actual property owner. Again, the whole intent of that is to hopefully, minimize these impacts that could arise from short-term rentals. We also, once we look through that information, You had the business license that was also applied for simultaneously. We in planning would approve that permit for the short-term home sharing. Our colleagues in business licensing would issue the business license, help the applicant with the TOT registration. We kept a registry of the approved home share permits. We monitored throughout the pilot program, and just like we had indicated back in 2020, was that we would ascertain whether this type of use is appropriate, over the long term. We would monitor the activity through the pilot program process and report findings back to the Planning Commission and City Council ultimately in terms of what to do with this type of use. So, where are we at now? We have issued, during the course of the pilot program, we issued 20 individual home shares. One of the things that we looked at was to see if there was a concentration of home shares throughout the city. This map kind of illustrates the variety of, or the sprawling nature of our home shares. So we didn't find any real concentration of them. So, and I think the point of that was to ensure that, you don't have clusters of areas or neighborhoods that are kind of, getting run over by these types of uses. So what else did we find? Of the 20, the average nightly stays was 2.5 nights. I know you can't book a half a night, but in the world of mathematics and statistics, you can have a 2.5 night average stay. During that time, we also looked at, obviously, if there was any complaints that came in, we would address those, but we didn't really get any complaints on violations for any of these 20 home share permits. We did windshield surveys in terms of making sure that the properties were being kept up to date and tidy and not becoming a nuisance in any way. We also looked at parking. From what we could observe throughout our windshield survey was that there is sufficient parking out there, and also in speaking with the folks that actually have permits for these, a lot of them have told us that their clients or the people that stay there typically Uber it to their place. They usually don't come in with their own vehicles, so which would support our windshield analysis or finding that there is no really any parking issues associated with these uses. So what else did we get? In terms of revenue, it's projected by our finance staff that we'll make about at least almost in the neighborhood of about $50,000 in revenue, and that is both from business licensing and home sharing permits, and then ultimately from TOT that's paid by each of these home shares. On average, because it's about 2.5 nights per booking, mathematically looks like each of these 20 would average about maybe like 2 weekends a month, if you will, in any given year, maybe a little bit less. So that kind of gives you a little bit of indication in terms of how frequently people will stay at these home shares. A couple other things to note, though. One of the things that, like I said early on, we got the word out to the community in terms of having this home share whole house not allowed through this permit or through this pilot program, because again, it's a home share. The whole intent of that is to have the property owner available on site, and again, the intent of that is to minimize the impacts. And so I'd be remiss to say that, we will never have advertisements out there that don't meet our code, and we do have some out there. And there are ways in which people get around that. And, they can advertise their rentals for greater than 30 days. By definition, that's not a short-term rental, and so by definition, they're not going against the grain of our ordinance. Other ways in which people have been elusive in terms of advertising. they call them vampire listings. Vampires come out at night, and so the internet knows no business hours from 9 to 5. It's a 24-hour operation, so someone could theoretically put a listing out for an hour, 2 hours at 3 in the morning, 3 in the morning here, maybe 2 in the afternoon somewhere in Europe, where someone is already up and awake and looking for a place to stay in the Americas and sees, oh, I can come to El Segundo. And so these are elusive ways that some of these folks can get away and still be, advertised for their advertisement for their homes. But that's not to say that we at least continue to look for these, and we do follow up appropriately if on those that can be identified, and go through the process of issuing notices of violation, ultimately citations if it does arise to that level. So ultimately, though, from what our experiences has indicated is that there has not been throughout this pilot program process any real impacts that we can identify that have resulted from these home shares. Again, a lot of it has to do with the fact that these are issued to the property owners. Property owners are on site, and they are the ones who have a vested interest to making sure that their properties don't become run amok by those who are staying there. So with that, since we did not really find any reason to not continue with this process, our recommendation is that the council adopt a code amendment, and thereby making home shares permanently allowable use, subject to a home sharing permit.
Thank you, Mr. Schomburg. Director Allen, anything else? Okay, the public hearing is now open for public input. I suspect I see people in the audience who have been in the crosshairs of some impossibly abusive conduct by short-term rentals, so.
First up is Mona Eisman.
Sorry. Mona Eisman, 415 Concord Street, next to the home that was the extended legal battle. You've seen me here before. We're back addressing the question of home sharing in our community, our very small, vital, tiny family neighborhood, okay? The pilot program was during an extraordinary time. Nobody was traveling, we weren't getting together in large groups, we certainly weren't having very much fun, okay? This was not a real test of real potential problems for our community. I want to correct a few statements that were made at the Planning Commission. There were many, many problem disruptive houses in our neighborhoods in El Segundo during that time pre-COVID. There was only one that extended in a legal and court battles, but I don't want it to be thought that there were many, many disruptive houses. Many people came concerned, knocking on the wrong door, parties, running around, urinating on lawns, beer bottles, streets, traffic, parking, trash, noise at all hours of the day and night. And I want to correct something. Noise at 3 a.m. is not just fun, it's a nuisance for neighbors. And I want everyone to realize that. A casual inconvenience to be tolerated, that we tolerated every day. Business groups asked the neighbor children not to play outside because they were busy in a meeting and they were being disrupted. Not okay. The children play in our neighborhood. The business meeting in the home share house comes second. Police need to believe the neighborhoods, not believe it as a minor nuisance, and say there is nothing they can do. Safety and quality of life for residents of El Segundo must always come first. Before the financial opportunity of a homeowner. Investors are looking to make we're making to look our small residential community a commercial hotel district. Home sharing where the owner host is present is better. It allows the owner a source of income while the homeowner is accountable, held responsible on any impact. But let's be real, they're operating a hotel, commercial property, and not contributing to the neighbor-friendly, safe family scent we're so proud of. They could also long-term rent. I'm a proponent. Why does the homeowner need to be present? To check and inform and enforce rules and good behavior of their guests. And if there's a complaint, they're there to make it happen. I don't think anybody wants to live next to a commercial business open 24/7 without a manager or employee present. Our experience was the police were not able to take action when there was not a homeowner present. Speaking with hotel managers, they'll say that they always have 24-hour manager and security because you can't imagine what goes on when people leave from home. You're never going to be able to predict who becomes a problem when they travel. And I bet all of us can remember a time we did something in a hotel room we wouldn't do at home. I understand that that El Segundo will approve and extend home-to-house sharing, but I urge you not to expand it to full house rental. All citations and violations need to cause you to lose your right to participate, as it is in LA. There was talk about a 60-day or 3-month timeout. I think the homeowner must be accountable and must be really responsible to know for the good behavior of their guests, to earn the privilege of earning this income. Reminder, Manhattan Beach still prohibits short-term rentals. LA limits it, so let's not become the full house sharing. Traffic, trash, beer bottles everywhere, safety, noise, guests starting fires, flooding hot tubs, all without regard. The happy life we lived before COVID. The city, revenge travel and large gatherers are back. It's happy for everyone. The financial incentive is great. It's a tough time. But I want to know my neighbors. I don't want to have new people coming and going at all hours of the day and night. We have long-term rentals on our street. I love it. I know them. They're our friends. We have many hotels in town. Let's welcome tourists and travelers, but let's really limit the disruption, potential safety, security, and impact in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Eisman. Any other public comments?
Jeff Shue.
I'm Jeff Shue at 411 Concord Street. You did a good job on the history of this issue, but I'd like to add something to it. If you remember at the time, there was a lot of debate on the pros and cons of short-term rental. It was very vigorous, in fact, almost exhaustive. And because of that, you developed a plan. And I don't think any of the people on both sides of the issue were 100% happy, but you developed a plan that was a compromise and a middle ground that most could live with. So I'm pleased about that. Now, I think what prompted Ms. Eisman to come up and talk about full house home sharing is because in the recent Planning Commission meeting, there was discussion. The discussion was, well, since this pilot program has worked so well, why don't we run another pilot program? And that would be 100% home sharing. And I would put forth to you that that pilot program has already taken place. That was before you adopted this program. It was a disaster, and it was because of the disaster that you adopted this program that you're going to vote on tonight. So I don't think we have any need for another program about 100% home sharing. That scratches open a scab that we'll be debating again and again, and we don't need that. And I know in that same meeting, they discussed, well, if there's noise, we have a party house ordinance, and that will take care of it. And I can tell you, if you're happy with about 5 to 7 years of it resolving itself through the court system, then I guess that's okay. But I think there was a lot of anguish in that time period with the residents, and at great legal cost to the city, I'm sure, to take care of the situation. So I think you're on a good track now, but if you expand it, it's a big mistake, and I would implore you not to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chu.
That's all I have, unless there's someone there.
Very well. Do I have a motion to close the public hearing?
Persick, so moved.
Second. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstock.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
Close.
All right. Council discussion. who'd like to start us off? Councilmember Nichol.
Just have a couple questions for staff. And then kind of an overall statement. First question is, at one point we had discussed entering into an illegal agreement with Airbnb where they would, in order for someone to list their property for rent on Airbnb, they would be required to upload their permit, right? And there was some discussion years ago that we were gonna have our city attorney speak with their attorneys, because some cities also have it where Airbnb, this is just one of the platforms, but Airbnb particularly will collect the TOT from the person booking and then produce the report and make the deposit directly to the city versus each individual permit holder doing that on their own. I know that was a discussion. I think if we're going to permanently adopt this, which I am totally in favor for, I think we should explore that.
Yeah, it didn't require attorneys talking to attorneys. Airbnb willingly followed through with that commitment, and it's a relationship we continue to foster.
But do we do that?
We do.
Okay, so you cannot.
Oh, I'm
like,
sorry.
Let me just
Add
clarify
some
that.
color to it.
The Airbnb had agreed to ensure that whatever home share is listed on their site has a city-issued license number.
Got it.
So that's issue number one. The other issue with regards to TOT, yes, that is something that our finance staff is definitely willing to do, because that takes the owners off the property owner or the host. And so that way, the only caveat to that though is that it really only works if they're only booking through Airbnb.
True. I mean, my
So-
thought though is, let's fast forward. It's a successful pilot program that is now going to potentially be a permanent program. And we're 10 years down the line, right? Each one of these booking sites is likely going to have similar setups as municipalities continue to evolve their own programs, right? And so my thought moving forward is, we found ourselves in a situation a couple of years ago with a hotel that was behind on their TOT, right? And we had to take action to try to recover those funds. I don't want us to find ourselves in a legal battle with a homeowner because they found themselves in, financial strain and decided, well, I'm just going to hold on to that TOT. I'm not going to put it in. Or I'm going to fudge the numbers. And then our finance staff's like, well, those numbers do not coincide with what Airbnb reported to us. And now we're chasing down a homeowner for money. I don't want to be the State Board of Equalization or whatever they're called now, right? Like, I just don't want that. I'd rather it run through the site. Those websites and those companies are large enough and staffed highly enough to be able to handle that, and our relationship just be with them.
Yeah, and that is true. Yes, that is correct. And I think what also has going for us as well is that we do have HDL and who are also versed in collecting the TOT from all the hotels as well. So that is another avenue that we can touch on or tap into to help us out as well, if and when hosts don't use Airbnbs. So that is definitely a source. And I will say though, at least in speaking with our finance staff, I mean, they are definitely open to doing that. I think there's a couple things that still need to be worked out before they go full on with that idea, because I think one of the things was that Airbnb just gives us the lump sum and there's really no
Breakdown.
Exactly. So.
Got it. Another question. In these numbers, when we start talking about potential total revenue of $52,620.23, are we backing out the cost of the company that we contract with to monitor for illegal listings?
No, so that was the total net, and I guess once you factor in what we spent on the firm to help us out, we're still in the net positive.
Fantastic. No other questions, but I just wanted to.
But I will say though, that company did work out okay. But in speaking with our finance staff, we already have a contract with HDL, and HDL seems to also be in the business of also doing that type of thing. So I think we're also going to explore perhaps amending our contract with HDL to provide that service at a significantly lesser cost.
Awesome, thank you. So I think in any kind of pilot program, right, we look for, is it successful, is it not successful? And I think leading up to this, we found ourselves crafting this home sharing concept of short-term rentals to try to fit a round peg in a square hole. Because, I mean, that night, it was pretty amazing, right? Do you remember? It was like the left side of the room wanted no Airbnb, the right side of the room wanted all Airbnb. And yeah, no one left happy. Everyone was angry at us that night, which means that was a beautiful compromise, right? And then COVID happened, so we delayed, but then it came to be. And someone asked me the other day, well, what do you think? Do you think it was a success? And I said, I don't care what it cost us. I think it was a fantastic success. No one's been in here complaining. Facebook is quiet. The residents are living their lives and they're not bothered by somebody who needs to rent out a room to help pay their mortgage, right? Or help pay for their lifestyle. And so I think that this is a wonderful program. I think we keep going forward with it. I think we can continue to refine it. But I think having the owner on site needs to be something that stays in this forever and ever and ever. We got the Olympics coming right around the corner. And so I think we should get ahead of that. We should get a plan in place or have an understanding or at least prepare some people to know that, listen, by right in our zoning, we can rent out our house for 30 days, right? Chris, you can move in with Lance and you can rent your house out for the Olympics for a month, right?
For the World Cup. The World Cup's first.
But we need to get ahead of this. We need to prepare for it because it happens, right? It happens every major city that hosts a major sporting event like that. People do look to profitize from it or benefit from it. And so I think if we get ahead of that and as a community we get some messaging out and we understand what may or may not be coming, I think it could be helpful. But I think staff, you guys did a great job. I think you showed leadership by pausing it, during the pandemic to say, hey, this isn't going to give us the glimpse that we want. And yeah, I am 110% in favor of continuing this project, program.
Other council comments? Councilmember Giroux.
Yes, actually, you mentioned in the first part that on the 20 permitted units, there was no complaints during that time frame?
Not of the, not related to any of the 20 that we.
Not of the 20. There was complaints, but they were not from the 20 that actually have a business license to do it.
Correct.
Right, so I think overall, again, I think when you run pilot programs and they come out successful, if you don't implement it, there's no reason to run the program to begin with. So I know there's some comments about the potential for expanding. I don't think that was ever a discussion up here. That might have been something that came up in a planning commission meeting, but it's not something that we're entertaining at all at this point in time. It's just a matter of implementing what we've already tried out and proven to be successful. So the only thing I would want to stipulate a little bit here is on the unpermitted listings going forward. I think it needs to be a little bit more severe than what it is right now. There should not be 3 strikes at this point in time. You've had 15 months to comply or not. I think we should go straight to $5,000 fine for the first time you find someone to be guilty of that. That's the only caveat I would put in this. I think we need to make it more severe because obviously the 20 people that did this did it the right way. So I think you got to reward good behavior and punish the bad behavior. That'll be the only thing I have to add on that.
Councilmember Pierstick.
I was going to speak similar to the, because I'm surprised that there's only 20. And I was looking at the map, there's one I know that's not on that map. So I just want to make sure, and that's just one that I happen to know because it's right by my house. But what we're doing to get those people to come on and to pull the permit. And then the other thing you had mentioned about Airbnb requiring the permit. How do we know that someone's just not giving Airbnb a number? Or do they have a listing of our permit code numbers to ensure that the number that they're referencing is the right number? And then are they, the renewal process, is it an annual renewal process? Do they just get it once and they have the number and Airbnb doesn't check it again? I just want to make sure we tighten up all those types of controls if we want this to go forward, because it just, all the little things that slippage happens
course.
when we're not paying attention. And so the word permanent to me is a bit daunting, because, because what happens when we make it permanent, it's out of sight, out of mind. And I just want to make sure the controls are in place, and that we're actually going after the people that are not pulling the permit, and the Airbnb is, do we issue a new number every year, or how does that process work with Airbnb and our permit number?
So, yes, it would be renewable every year. It would run consistent with just to not make it daunting and make a different process. It will just run with the business license cycle, which is a calendar year. With respect to the numbering, every year they'd be issued a new number. How do we verify that? Well, we verify that with at least with purposes with Airbnb. We've been in communication with them, and so they give us kind of like access to look at those that are being advertised, and we can actually just confirm. It would just be kind of like if we do we would just do spot checks to make sure that those that are listing with a number are actually a certified city-issued number.
And have we had conversations with other agencies, or are we just talking to Airbnb?
Just Airbnb. I know that there's a plethora of platforms out there. I think as I indicated in my report, I think, just the small ones like Craigslist, right? But there's also the big name on the block, obviously, is Airbnb.
Right.
So
And
Airbnb has actually came forward
So with this
voluntarily.
new company, the company that you want to switch the contract with, are they going to be doing the validation checks to, going online, making sure that they're all pulling permits? And how often does that happen?
Well, we haven't really got into those specifics in terms of how that would work. Right now, I think it's just a matter of coordinating with our finance staff to make sure that that the company that they currently use for TOT collection has that ability to do that. They seem to be fairly certain that they do have that ability, and then it would just be kind of wrapped up into their contract, and we could specify in terms of they could give us an indication as to how often that gets checked by them.
So, I'm good with extending the program, but like I said, the word permanent to me means out of sight, out of mind. And I'm not sure if we have all the proper processes in place to make sure that all people operating an Airbnb are following the rules. And I want to make sure that's tightened up before
I will say this, and maybe the term permanent is probably, and I think it was just the, what you're now doing away with the pilot program. So what are you doing? You're making this kind of like a permanent use, right? So, or shall I say it's an allowable use? That's probably a better term to use in terms of planning purposes.
Right.
It's an allowable use. But is it allowable through a process, through a home share permit process in which an applicant needs to submit their application, submit their paperwork. So there's some checks and balances in that sense. And then for those that don't have a permit, we would, embark upon the services like HDL, or we also have our code enforcement staff or neighborhood preservation staff that could assist as well, and then responding to complaints. And typically, what's going to happen is, at least in what our experience is that those complaints are usually going to be part of a whole house, like Mr. Chu had alluded to earlier.
Right. So I just want to make sure that I know one of the things we had approved in our budget was code enforcement. So is this going to be someone's job to validate, check, to make sure the permits are being reissued, renewed, and then doing samplings to make sure every so often that they're looking at the Airbnb rentals and making sure everyone that's renting or out soliciting has a permit?
Yeah, it would be, it's currently the job of the code compliance inspector, intermittently as time permits. To what we get is we were previously receiving a report from Granicus, who runs a screen check of all Airbnb, VBRO, Craigslist, or any listing agency, and provides us a report out. Staff can then cross-reference that with licensed permitted locations and those locations that are not licensed permitted. HDL provides the same service. We have a large contract with HDL already. They will provide it at a much cheaper rate, and they will run that report on demand as we need it. We just have not engaged in that because we didn't know what the outcome of this conversation would be. So the next steps would be engaging that conversation with HDL, as well as starting the conversations with BBRO and the other listing agencies that are typical for these platforms.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
I have a few. We engaged this pilot program in an effort to sort of bring order to chaos. And it appears to me that we have a very high functioning level of rule followers who are following the rules of the rule followers. But that doesn't necessarily indicate that the other people who aren't following the rules are being trapped, for lack of a better term. So we projected at the time about $106,000 in revenue, which would fully fund a second code enforcement person to do night and evening enforcement. And it appears to me, even with a cursory check of these online search sites, there's plenty of listings out there that have no license and are not being captured by a regulatory regime. So, I mean, yeah, the first four I looked at, right, were just like, they're just people who aren't there. So it troubles me that we would create a usage right. And this would be a usage right? Once we make something, we enshrine this in the code, someone buys a house based on a anticipated value in revenue. If we take that away from them, that is a regulatory action for which we are liable. So it gives me great pause to open-end this program if we have people who are predisposed to following the rules, are following our rules. All the other people we created this program to try and regulate who are not, are working around a system. I think we may have put greater faith in the ability of technology to capture this for us than it seems to be able to do, because at the end of the day, it's generating a report for us to follow up on, as opposed to automating or in some fashion going directly to that person and saying, warning, you are in VRBO with a whole house rental. That's just not occurring. And it's incumbent upon someone who it's a collateral duty for, right? Our neighborhood preservation person is also working the front desk, also doing these other things. There's a collateral duty, which likely explains why these things are out there. So it gives me pause to prematurely migrate this from a pilot program to an open-ended usage right or a property right. I just have some concerns about that. And I don't know what our options are if you just extend pilots. I don't know if there's a limit under state law that says pilots can only be this many months before you have to reconsider them or tweak and amend. Maybe that's a question for the city attorney. But it seems to me that there are people out there, because much like Councilmember Perstick, I look at the map and I look at the home rentals on my street and they're not on that map. And I'm sort of like, like I said, whether people are doing 55 miles an hour in the right lane with 2 seconds between them, or all doing 55 miles an hour and they're not writing them any tickets, but it's the other people that are the concern. And I don't know that we're capturing that. So if I can go a little bit in order to get your assessment, Attorney, am I totally wrong on the idea of creating a property right here that people would say, hey, you were taking away my property right if we try to change this later on? And then if I go back to planning with a question about what do you think our solution is for the non-rule following masses who apparently are dotting West Maple?
On your first question, yes, if you go to a permanent program, you will be creating a property right for those that utilize the program. And so if they get a permit and you then want to, you could still then get rid of the program, but those that are participating, they would have a right to continue to engage in that conduct under the rules that have been established. So yes, you are creating a property right.
So to be grandfathered in, right?
Well, and you can't, I mean, in order to get rid of, it'd be then a legal non-conforming use is what it's called, and it can take, a couple of decades to phase those out. It's just the way it works. These are a little unusual as far as a use, so it will be hard to track also as far as that. But yes, you're creating a legal non-conforming property if you take away this use in the future in a property right.
And is there a limit on when pilot programs have to sundown? I know Councilmember Perstick talked about extending or continuing is that an option? Or
Yeah,
is 15 months, is someone going to look askance and say that you are torturing the language?
Well, if you want to continue it, you don't feel like you've got, because of the pandemic, that you want to look at this for another 6-9 months or something, then I think that, that would be something that could be defensible. But just having it, continuously a pilot for years and years, no, that would be problematic.
And on the planning side, do you view if we migrate to a different technology, and with in theory, we have a budgeted code enforcement boat space with someone to do this, do we feel, are you comfortable that the regulatory regime will keep up with the usage? I mean, that's kind of a leading question. You obviously will say yes. You're not going to say, oh no, we're totally overmatched. It's a terrible idea. What do you think our likelihood, though, is of getting to 90% compliance as opposed to what appears to be about 20% compliance based on my 2-minute search?
And in what time frame?
Well, no, I mean, that's a little bit of an open-ended question. I mean, this is your front door business, not mine.
Yeah, so from an enforcement standpoint, it's a challenge. Whether it's HDL or Granicus or any other service that provides this, they do a surface level screen of what's live and available online that you and I could look up today. What they do, they just consolidate the package and they hand it to us. It is difficult. There have been cities who have used that information, and it's been difficult to use that as evidence in case or in prosecution in trying to demonstrate that a user is actually violating your code. In several cities, there are task forces that actually book rooms to verify, and staff go and stay at that location in order to verify compliance with the local regulations. It's very difficult to enforce, and that is the extent of what you have to go through to guarantee 100% compliance. Anything in between, it's just a constant chase of the violators. Now, we will see better compliance as we continue to the outreach, as we continue to engage with the other platforms. We're building a great relationship with Airbnb, so we'll continue to see better compliance. We haven't taken a punitive approach with those who are willingly trying to make the effort to comply. There are a handful that purposely obscured the system, and so we did take a punitive approach on those. But we have seen momentum in the compliance over the last year. And so it'll just be another enforcement matter. Additional staff, of course, will help that. It will probably become the majority of what somebody does at some point.
Thank you. So, Councilmember Nickel?
I was going to say, to Councilmember Giroux's question about the penalty, I know we have social host ordinance, we have party house ordinance, right? We created these things so it was a shortcut to a more, a better penalty, a stricter penalty to deter people from breaking the rules, right? So what would we need to do in order to give your staff the ability to streamline that enforcement? One strike and here's your $500 fine, right? Become compliant, you're on our radar. Second non-compliance here, so you're saying it, but it's hard to prove non-compliance? I mean, if they're listed online without a permit, that's non-compliance, is it not?
Because, listing is not the same as actually hosting.
I mean, it's a piece of evidence that it appears that it's occurring, but it doesn't necessarily prove that it is. I could, maybe.
Can we not write into our ordinance that you are not allowed to advertise and solicit your property for short-term rental?
Probably get in
without a permit?
Freedom of speech. It's a weird angle to take, as people can list whatever they want.
You cannot solicit prostitution. Isn't that illegal?
That's correct, yeah.
That's a pretty,
you're right. You're right.
Egregious example, but it's an example.
So I understand your point. We've tied this to our other mechanisms for code enforcement, if you will. That is, we can issue misdemeanors, we can issue different types of citations, and if you want us to look at you know, what's the maximum we could do for like first-time violators? I'd want to go back and take a look at that. It wasn't an issue that had arisen, because we drafted this to really tie into, again, our normal code enforcement options, and you want to run, you potentially want to make this where the, if you will, the first violation goes to maybe what is the third violation in our misdemeanor code. I mean, it's usually stepped up.
What we learned through, you know, our whole home rental pilot program that we ran prior to this pilot program was that
we didn't run one, but somebody did.
Someone referred to it as such.
I'm sorry, I was just being a lawyer.
Being a lawyer. Is that, I mean, how many hours did you and your staff spend on that? And the person didn't stop, and in the end, I think the person, they finally did. But if you run the economics on it, I'm pretty sure that individual came out with more money in their pocket.
Well,
right, when after all the fees and their attorney fees and the time and everything.
It's quite possible they did. Now, that person was a very interesting individual, spent a night or two in jail for not adhering to the court's order about.
But the staff time and effort.
Oh, it was.
We can't do that for every.
I think this person was a very unusual person as far as the willingness to just break the law and suffer all sorts of I mean, there were tens of thousands of dollars in fines. We did get TOT back out of it that was owed, but you're right, it was an incredible amount of effort. It was very painful for the neighbors that lived around it. And then they had to, you know, spend their time assisting us to do the enforcement. You know, it was really painful for, I mean, from the city, from perspective of the office, out of the hours from my office and you know, planning, and then it was a big deal.
So I'd say this, I think I'm safe in saying that we would like 100% compliance. If we sit up here and we deliberate over an ordinance or a new rule and we put it into place, we think, okay, yes, we're going to get 100% buy-in, we're going to get 100% compliance. We clearly are not getting that. So then what I would love is for you to then say to the people sitting in these chairs, this is what we need you to approve in order for us to achieve the 100% compliance that you desire. Because the entire concept of this is it's for the good actors. That's why this program exists, right? But the bad actors are going to continue to be the bad actors. I do not want to punish the good actors based upon the bad actors' actions. Therefore, what do we need to do and what do you need from us in order to bring people into compliance? I think that's us as a board. We don't need to get into the weeds on how exactly you're going to do it. Just you tell us, bring an item to this council. We need you to approve this so that we can do this. This is why.
What I would suggest is extending the sunset date at least so that we don't create some non-conforming condition, and those who are conducting business properly can continue to do so. And we work collectively with the city attorney's office to take another look at that. The compliance is difficult. I'm not going to, you know, sugarcoat that. Compliance is difficult to achieve with this because it is a 100% online listed service, and that presents a myriad of difficulties when it comes to enforcement. But I think we can come back with some suggestions.
How long would we need to extend? This expires on December 31st?
Yes, it does. It does. So if
we've already budgeted and funded someone who would do evening, nighttime code enforcement. That is their only job. I mean, we haven't hired that person yet, obviously, but that position is budgeted and funded. So I think that part should ease some of that burden. Councilmember Drew?
Well, there's two options. Well,
one second, Councilmember Drew had comment real quick.
My apologies.
The things that come out of outgoing council members' mouths, solicitation of prostitution on this dais. Well played. A couple things. You're right, there's no magic pill to get 100% compliance. 100% it's difficult to achieve, but a couple things I'm thinking about here. You had 20 permits that were good actors, proved they could do this, should we consider saying every time there is a new permit applied for, a business license applied for, it is a 1-year probationary period? Because it's new. You get the 20 that already done it, they've proven they can do it, theirs is not a probationary period. Anything new that comes behind that, you have to prove that you can be a good actor.
So my response is that the difficulty that we're having is not with those who are going through our permit process. The difficulty is those who are not going through the permit process.
Understand. So then my second part of that is, when you apply for a business license, it's public record. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay, so gives you an address, the whole 9 yards. So we actually will know exactly which houses applied for it, what exactly those addresses are. That's public information. Is there anything wrong with giving that public information to our community that can help police itself? Now, it's public information. We do the same thing when we're doing any other, the social ordinance and all the other stuff. We're saying it's reactive enforcement on everything we do because we can't be everywhere at once. Is there anything wrong with putting that out there? And now, on my street, if I look at those 20 names, I'm like, okay, there's no short-term rental agreement here. We call the code enforcement. Now you have an issue. Now at least you know where it is. Because I don't see any other way, obviously, other than that. Because you can't just jump out of your office every day and go out and go around and figure out who's not doing what they're supposed to do on a Friday night. So there are things like this. I think in the end, if the information is known, here's the outliers, the outlier gets reported, that solves some of the problem. And yes, so you say, oh, well, we're kind of policing each other. Yeah, well, that's kind of what we do in the community anyway. So my question is there anything wrong with that? Legally?
No, it's, if you wanted to create that information so it's available so people could see where those businesses are in town, that's acceptable.
And I will say, though, as I indicated earlier, we already have a an Excel spreadsheet, that has all the approved home share permits.
I'm saying get it so that it's listed so that people can come in and say, hey, as a resident, I can sit there and say, whatever, it's a tab on our website, and I can print this out and I have it. Now I know exactly what's there and what's not, what I see out there does not match up with this.
The map that you showed tonight, if that was on our website. Right, I mean, to Councilmember Drew's point, right? If all of a sudden I start noticing there's a bunch of people walking down my block with suitcases, and I just can go to the city website, like, oh, I wonder who's short-term renting on my block, and it's like, oh, look, there's a house. Okay, going on. Because the other thing is, I applied for an ADU, right? What does the city have me sign as part of that ADU permitting process?
You have to record a covenant.
A covenant. What does that covenant state?
That you shall not use it as a short-term rental.
And what is the penalty for breaking that covenant? Nothing. I mean, it's state law that ADUs cannot be short-term rented, right? So what is the punishment under state law for renting short-term renting an ADU?
It's not state law, but we are permitted as a local agency to adopt that provision.
Got it.
And so then we can cite them with misdemeanors or infractions, and there are fines and penalties.
And our current ordinance, or this pilot, when it implements this pilot program, prohibits the use of an ADU as a home share.
But have we issued any citations for someone doing it?
For using an ADU? No, we have not gotten any.
I mean, I know one for sure.
But for instance, with a home share situation, to Chris's point about what is a right, there's no covenant you sign when you buy your house. You're in the R1 zone. It's zoned single-family residence. That comes with its own established code and rights. There's no covenant. But is there any difference between? So let's say I'm renting out my house without a permit for short-term rental. I'm doing it, right? It's the exact same process, right? A misdemeanor, a this, or that, right? For a code violation. Same code violation whether I've signed a covenant or not, correct?
Right.
So what is that? So that covenant is not even worth the paper it's written on?
Well, the point of the covenant is so that as people, that person's on notice of that unit can't be used for that. Somebody goes to purchase it, you know, that buyer's then on notice that that's not a legal use. I mean, it's a better mechanism, so when the city goes to enforce, that you can prove there's notice to the property owner that they can't do that. So that's the purpose for which we do that. I mean, it's.
But if we don't step up our enforcement efforts, there could be ADUs being short-term rented tonight. Is I guess the point I'm getting at, whether there's a covenant signed or not, right? Because if they don't have a permit, because they can't get a permit for that ADU, right? They could game the system if they really wanted to and have you come look at a room in their house, and yet they have the people stay in the ADU. We can't. That's very, very hard, right, to enforce. But you know, we have no means by which to even enforce if somebody's renting out on short-term basis an ADU currently.
I was going to add that if you have a couple of options here. You could extend this pilot program out and take that action, and then we can come back with information about enforcement, or you could adopt it, and then to the extent that there's already a section here that refers to another portion of the municipal code as far as citations and whatnot. We could come back and just amend that section if we think there's a way to make it more enforceable, or you know, again, this is just for these people that are getting the permits. So, you know, if there's something that these are probably, again, not the target people that are the problem. We can do something that we can always amend this code as far as what the penalty is for the violation. So you could adopt this tonight, and we could just, you know, as part of the overall issue, we could come back and amend that section at a later date. But I think, if I'm hearing, the biggest concern is not really those that are taking advantage of this and are complying with these rules that you're adopting. It's those that aren't. So adopting this isn't, I don't think one way or the other, going to change what people are doing in those other properties.
I would recommend that we extend the pilot program and that we come back with something that probably looks a lot like this, but has a more robust process on it for bringing the entire, and I hate the term ecosystem, but the entire ecosystem of short-term rentals under control, because this is designed to bring order to that chaos, and I feel like we are, you know, the good part of it we've got under control, but we just have enough absconders out there that I think I would be more comfortable if we had a more robust sort of enforcement arm to keep that under control. That would be my druthers, but.
I'm going to concur with that. And then the process to get the permit, is that automated online, or does someone have to come in?
People, they have to come in or submit their information by mail, but typically we have them come in and submit that info.
So maybe we streamline the process so it's easier, because if it's clunky, they're not going to, they're just not going to do it, so.
Yeah, and we have accepted it by mail.
Okay.
Yeah. And just so, a couple things. We can come back with that. I think for those who would be subject to a permit and actually have a permit, you know, there's certain, you know, ramifications that occur if they violate. So then I think from what I'm hearing from the council is that issue aside, we also need to address those that are not acting in good faith, those who are not getting a permit, whether it's for home share or whole house, and really increase the stick, if you will.
Well, that's right. The purpose of the pilot program was not just to regulate our good performers. It was to try and bring all of short-term rentals under an overarching regulatory regime that we could control and have enforcement powers over. And that was sort of, so we narrowly, we've hit a narrow part of it, but I don't think we've achieved the success of the pilot program just because there's so many outside the bounds of the program. So like I said, there'll be a time in the future, I don't doubt, that we finally approve this, and I think it probably looks about like this. It just needs to have more people in this, to my mind. Does that have to be a substitute motion, Mr. City Attorney, or do I have to, how do I do that?
Well, just to address your last thought, the what I understand the council wants is to address the violations of, in addition to what's in this code, and potentially to even increase the penalties for violating this section if you are somebody that participates through the process, but you want to address all those others that aren't using this process but are doing the short-term rentals. And again, that could be done separately, but you want to do it at the same time. So we will need to take this and make some changes to it pretty quickly so that you can introduce it tonight, because otherwise we won't get this in effect until
If we enshrine short-term rentals in perpetuity for 20 houses, with our data set is those 20 houses, and then all of a sudden we turn around in January and people say, oh, wait, this is going to be a permanent right, and it turns out we have 250 short-term rentals, then our rule-made decision on a data set that is wildly inaccurate.
Well,
Yes.
I understand. I guess I was just thinking out loud what we need to do to accomplish what you want done. We need to quickly take this document and make some revisions so they can adopt it tonight and have a second reading at the next meeting.
Right.
But can we just extend the program?
The problem is this is codified. Instead of being adopted via resolution, which is something we could just do, in one night, this is a municipal code provision, and so we have to read that twice. The sunset's actually specified in the municipal code, so we have to address that sunset and then come back for a second reading. In the meantime, we need to work with the city attorney's office to operate within whatever the new sunset is, to come back to the council with further revisions to this municipal code.
So we can do this evening. Just I would suggest perhaps you take this item and we'll just for the moment, you can continue it till.
We'll continue this part of the public hearing. Well, it's not a public hearing, but we continue this item till later in the evening.
Right. The public hearing's been closed, and we'll continue the deliberations till later in the evening, and we'll make the changes so that we can adopt this.
I guess I'm not concerned at all. I don't not share your concern about this being a right.
But you can move approval then.
It's home sharing. Home sharing to an Airbnb to a short-term rental person, they hate it. They run away from it. Properties sit on the market here. There's a listing currently for sale. The person home shares the front unit, makes a killing on it, right? There's been multiple people that know that it's an Airbnb rental, have inquired with the real estate agent to buy it because they're like, sweet, I want to rent the whole thing out. And the real estate agent has had to tell them, well, you have to live here to do it. Not interested, see you later, gone, right? And so the whole purpose of this program is to weed that person out, right? To keep the home sharing in. You're already legally, Michael, please correct me if I'm wrong. I am by right in the R1 zone legally allowed to rent 2 rooms out in my 3-bedroom house, am I not?
I believe so, for greater than 30 days.
For greater than 30 days, by right. I can turn my home into a little frat house by right. Right, so for 30 days or more, right? So what we're doing here is we're I guess setting into stone, making it a right that with a permit through the city, you're allowed to share your home via short-term rental, via rental less than 30 days, with a permit from the city. If you don't have that permit from the city, you're not allowed to do that. So I'm not as concerned about this legal non-conforming status, because the reality is if it becomes a problem that too many people are home sharing their house, then El Segundo has fundamentally changed to the point where you're going to have 5 people elected up here that are going to want to abolish this home sharing provision in the municipal code and make it where you can just short-term rent all you want. And so I guess I don't share the concern of that right all of a sudden being there, because we do need to step up the enforcement. We need more people buying into this, but I'm not concerned about giving that right to property owners in the R1 zone or R2 zone.
Mayor Pro Tem, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Basically what we're suggesting is, or what you're suggesting is, just to continue the program the way it is, to give us time to better complete what this is. Like, for example, the unpermitted uses, what are we going to do about that? It's to just make this a more complete package so that we don't have maybe two separate items pertaining to this one issue.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's why I'm saying I think by just extending it, we're not taking anything away from anybody who's doing it right now anyway. We're not really changing anything. We just want to get it to the point where we have one complete document that has all the things in there that we're worried about. Does that make sense? And that's why I would agree that I think it's a good idea to give us a little bit more time and just continue the program the way it is, and whatever we have to do to get there, that's kind of where I'm at.
And I would suggest if the council does wish to do that, maybe extend it out through the next calendar year, because that way, for those who want to continue on with it, they have that additional full year to do it. It gives us some ability to gather additional data if needed, or if the need arises. But most importantly, though, it allows us time to coordinate with our city attorney, go through the administrative guidelines and update those as necessary, as well as the other parts of the municipal code, not just related to home sharing, but related to violations of like chapters 1 and 2 and all these other nuanced sections of the code that pertain to violations, so we can comb through those as well.
I think also to Ms. Eisman's point, we did do this in 2022, and probably half this year has been a little dicey. It's starting to really pick up now, as we've seen with everything. So I think extending it out will give us a better data set as well.
Okay, so we're going to continue deliberating on this. Well, you're right, but we're going to do other items while you're in deliberation mode.
Yeah, actually, I don't think it'll take that much because there's a red line that's in the package that I think will undo some of the strikeout, and then a couple of sections need to have the language changed. And so I just need a few minutes to go through that, and I can do that while and then talk with Michael and make sure we're clear on what we're doing, and then we can sometime later in the evening bring it back to you to clarify and this is to go through, the intent is to take this through December of 2023.
If that's a recommendation, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Okay, then we'll move to item 9, the amendment to city contributions for CalPERS medical premiums. Staff presentation.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, our Human Resources Manager, Amanda Elke Truman, will give that presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight I have a housekeeping issue, or a housekeeping item before you. The labor contract that the city has with the CEA bargaining unit includes a negotiated increase to the medical premium contribution amount, which was previously approved by the City Council when the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, with CEA was adopted. So this item includes a resolution to CalPERS documenting that negotiated increase. And then second is a resolution to bring the city's medical allowance for part-time unrepresented employees current to the 2023 amount that we're required to offer to employees who are working an average of 30 hours per week or full-time as defined under the Affordable Care Act.
Any council comments? City Attorney, would you like to read the title?
Yes, give me one moment.
We have 2 resolutions for you.
Yes. The first is resolution fixing the employer contribution under the Public Employees Medical and Hospital Care Act at an equal amount for employees and annuitants with respect to a recognized employee organization. 003 City Employees Association is ready for adoption.
Who will enter this motion? So moved.
Nichols, second.
Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Giroux?
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol?
Aye.
Councilmember Persick?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel?
Yes.
Mayor Boyles?
Yes.
I vote.
And second, or the next resolution is resolution fixing the employer contribution under the Public Employees Medical and Hospital Care Act at an equal amount for employees with respect to 009 unrepresented hourly employee group is ready for adoption.
Who ended this?
Nichols, so moved.
Pimentel, second.
Councilmember Giroux?
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol?
Aye.
Councilmember Perstock?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel?
Yes.
Mayor Boyle?
Yes.
I vote.
All right, on to item 10. Is the rescission of notice of intent to withdraw from the Independent Cities Risk Management Authority Insurance Risk Pool. So we'll be rescission or withdrawal, rescission of our withdrawal.
Yeah, rescission on
Yes,
withdrawal.
we will, and our risk manager, Hank Liu, will give that, present this item.
Mr. Liu, the floor is yours.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. On March 15, 2022, we gave our current risk insurance pool, ICRMA, which stands for Independent Cities Risk Management Authority, our intent to withdraw from the risk pool so we can study the feasibility of remaining in the risk pool. So staff contacted three risk pools. We contacted California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, CJPIA, the Public Entity Risk Management Authority, PIRMA, and the Public Risk Innovation Solutions and Management, which is PRISM, to get a rough indication or estimate of the total savings or cost that we would incur if we would to join the respective risk pools. So on this matrix, you can see that on the first row, that's our 23-24 premium for our general liability, workman's comp, crime, cyber, and terrorism. We contacted CJPIA, PIRMA and PRISM, and got the similar programs with similar MRLs, member retained limits or deductible, and those were the costs they gave us. The second row is the exit fee. Year one, if we leave ICRMA, this is how much they would charge us, which equals to our claims administration fee. Year two and year three, there's also a cost, but it's half for year two and 25% for year three. So you can see the total cost for all the risk pool would be greater than our current premium. And so our recommendation is to rescind our notice to ICRMA and remain in the risk pool for the next fiscal year, and maybe explore changing risk pools maybe 3 to 5 years from now, when we can try to control some of the current claims that we expect to drop off in a year. So, hold on. Sorry. Yeah, so that's our recommendation, is to remain in ICRMA, but do another study a few years, like 3 or 5 years from now. So I'm here to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Liu? Fantastic. Your position continues to shine. That's we didn't used to continually shop for insurance this way, but we shop for it like people do in the market, and it continues to save us money. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And just here's a note, for PRISM and PIRMA, they gave us a range. So I quoted the high range, but both of the pools wanted us to let us know they gave us a very conservative figure. So we could save money, but let's see what happens next year when our loss runs go down and maybe our reserves go down, and we could probably get a better deal a few years from now.
Thank you very much.
Just I want to echo that. Thank you. Since you've been come on, you really helped us save a lot of money, and I just want to thank you for your efforts in bringing this. I know when people mention insurance, a lot of people kind of glaze their eyes over, but you've done an amazing job, and I just want to thank you.
Well, I'm just trying, and it's really interesting talking to the risk pools and learning the advantages. There are a lot of great things with CJPIA and PRISM and PIRMA, but it's just right now the cost is just not there for us.
Yeah, thank you.
Right.
All right, City Attorney, would you like to read the?
Yes, and just to add to that, make it really clear, it's about 11 lawsuits that we've received over the last almost 3 years. There's a big reason that this did not work out. With that, a resolution authorizing the city manager to rescind the city's written notice of intent to withdraw from the Independent City Risk Management Authority is ready for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
All right,
Thank you, Council.
resolution's adopted.
Thank you. On to item 11, Mr. Round, are you ready for this, or are you going to still work on 8 and we can skip around, or?
I'm working through the other items, so if you could go to the
So you stay on, if you're staying on 8 for that open deliberation, we'll move to 11, the multifamily residential zone potential redevelopment study findings.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I have one more presentation for you this evening. I'm joined by our team from EPS, Roderick Hall, and Darren. Is Darren on the line? Oh, okay. And they will walk us through a presentation. The council recalls earlier this year in March, we came before the council. There was a report out of a previous grant that the city was awarded, I think in 2018, 2019. And there was some efforts at looking at inclusionary housing. After discussing with council, we quickly retooled because there was a reminder that previously the city was looking at R3 and specifically increasing the density in portions of the R3 zone in order to incentivize redevelopment. So we quickly retooled. EPS was already engaged, and so we kept them on board because of their knowledge and expertise in this area. And we took a look at what it would take to what it would take to incentivize redevelopment in the R3 zone, what type of density it would take. And so Darren and Rod are here to walk us through the presentation and the findings, and then we have a couple of asks, or essentially a main ask for the council for next steps. And so with that, I'll hand it over, and Darren and Rod are going to share their screen for tonight's presentation.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. My name again is Darren Smith. I'm with the consulting firm of Economic and Planning Systems, and with me is Rod Hall. Thank you for having us this evening and accommodating our remote participation. We, as Mr. Allen introduced us, we have been working over the last few months to assess the viability of rezoning your R3 properties in a way that would enable redevelopment to occur. Through the housing element conversation that occurred earlier, it was already foreshadowed that what we're looking at here is the need, if those properties are going to redevelop, the need for there to be a considerable increase in the amount of density that is required. And some of the questions that we heard from that earlier conversation regarding the housing element, we have prepared for here, particularly around what various types of density look like. And so we'll be speaking to that again as well. And so with that, I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay. Okay. Is everyone seeing our presentation at this time?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I can no longer see you, so unfortunately I'm going to be winging it until we get to the Q&A. So again, we are with the consulting firm of Economic and Planning Systems, and we had previously done some work regarding the viability of an inclusionary housing standard, and this presentation is a redirection from that. Gosh, I'm not seeing the slide change. Are you seeing the slide
Darren,
change?
yeah, we do see it change, but can you actually start the PowerPoint presentation because we're still seeing the working presentation.
Oh, you are? Okay, I'm seeing the actual presentation. Oh, boy. My apologies. Let me start over. Okay, are you seeing? Oh, gosh. Yep. Are you seeing the full screen now or still the working?
We see it.
Yes, we see it.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I can't move the screen.
There you go.
Did that change?
Yes. Yes.
Outstanding. Wonderful. Okay. So we were retained to help try to figure out how to produce redevelopment or promote redevelopment of some certain properties in the city and create more production of new housing. And specifically, we were asked to look at the R3 properties in one particular study area to develop a financial model that forecasts what kind of feasibility constraints and requirements there might be for replacement, including some requirements under Senate Bill 330 that was passed a couple of years ago that really speaks to the need to replace existing lower income housing in every community throughout the state of California, and ultimately to identify some development regulations that currently apply to the study area that may need to be amended to enable this redevelopment. So I want to quickly speak to what SB 330 is all about. That's the also known as the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. And it has a variety of intentions, one of which is to really limit the demolition of lower cost and rent stabilized apartments that already exist, either naturally occurring or are already subject to deed restrictions. But basically, any of the properties that already have or even have had in the last 5 years tenants that earn less than 80% of median income are subject to this replacement requirement. And what that means is that if you can determine that any of the units in the R3 zone that we're talking about have been occupied by such a household of lower income, that for a new project to come along in the future needs to provide as many low-income units as were already there. And if you don't know the answer about how many of those existing units were occupied by such households, then they have, under the state law, what's called a rebuttable presumption, which is you look at the overall census-based information regarding the proportion of renting households that are at lower incomes, and you assume that every building that gets demolished reflects that overall citywide average. So again, if you know precisely who lives there or lived there in the last 5 years, you can use that information. If not, you use this rebuttable presumption, which in the case of El Segundo is about 25% of all the housing units, all the rental housing units in the city have been occupied by households earning 80% or less, meaning that for any of these properties that exist now, if they are to be redeveloped, and let's say there's, let's call it 100 units just to make the math easy. If there's 100 such units on one of these properties today, then the assumption is that 25 of those units would need to be replaced in the new development, and the rest of those new development units could be market rate. So that's what we mean by the one-for-one replacement of demolished units at comparable affordability. The second aspect of SB 330 says that if you have existing tenants in these buildings and you choose to redevelop those buildings, that you need to provide another place for those folks to live, or at least provide monetary assistance for them to find housing elsewhere. And essentially what that means is that you would have to pay the difference between what they were paying before and what they have to pay in their new home because you have displaced them. And finally, SB 330 grants the former tenants the right to return to the replacement units in the new development project. So as we're thinking about the feasibility of new development in the R3 zone, we have to consider SB 330. It is not a forever law, but it has been extended through the year 2030 as a requirement for any new housing that were to be developed, and it may continue beyond that time as well. So we want to talk a little bit about existing conditions in this area. We are talking about now the area just west of Pacific Coast Highway to Washington Street, and from Sycamore Avenue on the north down to Mariposa Avenue on the south, as representative of the R3 zone. Within this area, there are currently about 577 units, multifamily units, on a total of 74 parcels, comprising collectively 18 acres of land. So what that means is that the current density of these R3 properties, dividing the number of units by the number of acres, yields 32 units per acre. Which is in fact more dense than R3 itself allows right now. The maximum density allowed under R3 today is 27 units per acre. So some of these units were built at a higher density than is currently allowed. And we have some images just to set the stage here for what the R3 area looks like. This is two views of the intersection of Indiana Court and Maple Avenue. And as shown here, primarily under current conditions, we're talking about 1 to 2 story buildings, even though they are zoned multifamily and are among the highest density in the city of El Segundo. They are still 1 and 2 story buildings for the most part. And so that's the existing condition. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rod to talk a bit about the math that we did to determine the feasibility of development under various density assumptions.
Thank you, Darren, and good evening, Council. Utilizing the existing conditions described by Darren in the previous slide, as he mentioned, we then developed a prototype to solve for existing land value per acre in the study area. And based on our estimates, we estimated, that land value per acre is around $12.9 million. And this is important to note because as developers begin to think about feasibility for redevelopment, they will need to pay the current landowners this amount in order to purchase the property. Next slide, please. We then took this prototype and developed 5 distinctive models, one of which is operating under the rebuttable presumption scenario that Darren mentioned earlier. That's going to be the second model you see here, the 25% replacement. And then from there, we begin to try to determine what it would mean to amend the R3 zoning in the study area in order to ensure development feasibility. So as you can see in Model 1, when there's a 0% replacement, a developer would need to build at least 68 dwelling units per acre at market rate in order to ensure development feasibility. And then as you look across the model, you'll also notice that the share of replacement units increases, or as the share of replacement units increases, so too does the number of market rate units. And this is because as affordability requirements increase, the ability of developers to meet the baseline property values decrease. And so in order to figure out how to recover those costs in order to pay the landowner the appropriate amount, developers are typically going to develop a strategy that will allow them to produce more market rate units in order for the project to continue to pencil. And so in the case of this study, we end up estimating that dwelling units in the study area will need to be amended to allow roughly 70 to 120 dwelling units per acre contingent upon replacement requirements. Next slide, please. And we also want to recognize that we heard this earlier from council, so we recognize that mentally trying to conceptualize dwelling units per acre is not exactly the easiest thing to do. So we found a few different developments that are built at the various dwelling unit acres that we solved for in our models. 3 of the properties here are in the Southern California market, and 1 is located in Seattle, Washington. And again, to make this fun, I like to call this guess that density, because of course, as you look at different properties, how a property is built and interacting with the built environment may not be what you assume naturally it is in terms of the dwelling units per acre. So as Darren, as you go through this, each property will pop up a dwelling units per acre, and you can sort of look at this and get a conceptualization of what these numbers actually mean. So what you see here is Missouri Place, which is located in Los Angeles. That's coming in at 137 dwelling units per acre, so on the higher end of what we saw for in our models. And then next, please. Next, we have Waterstone and Playa Vista. This is coming in at around 69 dwelling units per acre, so that's going to be on the lower end of the model. Thinking of if a developer wanted to come into El Segundo and did not have to do any replacement requirements, we again said 68. This is what that would look like. And then you have something like Mio Apartments in Seattle, Washington, which is 205 dwelling units per acre. And then last but certainly not least, another property in Playa Vista, which is coming in at 99 dwelling units per acre. Next slide, please.
So if I can just jump in real quickly there, what this again demonstrates is that when we think of multifamily housing, we are able to conceptualize that some of these things may look very big, like the Missouri Place up there in the upper left, coming in at 137 units per acre. That's 5 stories of construction, of residential construction over a 2-story parking garage. So it ends up being about 7 total stories, probably around 85 feet in height, which of course is significantly higher than what you've got in your R3 today. The Playa Vista Waterstone and the Mio apartments in Seattle, each of those is 4 stories, which you can probably do in about 50 feet of height. And again, depending on the size of the units and the parking requirements for those units, you can get anywhere from 70 units per acre up to around 200 units per acre in a 4-story building. That may not be quite as much of a shock to the system as would a 7-story building, as you see in the upper left. And then the Pacific Promenade project is pretty typical of a lot of multifamily housing happening throughout California today. It is a podium parked project or has a wrapped structured parking garage, and it's achieved in a 5-story building that probably goes at about 55 feet in height. So moving on to the next slide.
Perfect. Thank you, Darren. So, just picking up where Darren left off about the variety of regulations that are going to be involved in development, as you can see here, not only did we in the model try and look at dwelling units per acre, which is, in other words, density, we also thought about a lot of other regulations that might come into play with ensuring development feasibility. And so, from lot area and lot coverage to height requirements to parking requirements, as Darren has touched on, we want to note that amendments to each of these regulations will inevitably involve some sort of trade-off. For example, if it's important to council to maintain a specific built environment form, as it relates to height requirements, it may make more sense to increase lot coverage as opposed to increasing height requirements. Because in other words, the bigger the site, the less height you would need to continue to pencil out. And so what that could look like in terms of strategies, that could be a program that encourages lot consolidation in development that maximizes, or development that maximizes lot consolidation. And then certainly last but certainly not least, we want to note that the modification of development regulations will vary from one scenario to the next as different developments, as different densities will require different materials to be used and different requirements as it relates to the location of parking. So Darren spoke on some of the properties that we showed being about 7 stories. And then if you continue to go higher, of course, the materials typically would end up being changed to be able to reinforce the height at which the building is built, which is, of course, going to drive the cost up for the developer. So these are just other regulations to think about amending and or altering to ensure that you can continue to be feasible as you make changes to your R3 zoning. Next, go ahead.
Thank you, Rod. So I think the bottom line here is that, as Rod was saying, the feasibility of redeveloping a given property is absolutely going to be informed by what's on that site today. And because of SB 330, it's also going to be dependent on the understanding of who is in fact living there and how many of those existing units may need to be replaced in the future. But in general, if we were going with what is called the rebuttable presumption, the citywide standard affordability for rentals across the city, we are looking at densities around 70 to 80 units per acre being required to make a new development project feasible and to replace the existing R3 units. And so, again, just going back to this slide, that's looking at anywhere from a 4 to 5 story building. We believe that it is very possible to achieve those densities in a 4 to 5 story building in El Segundo. But as Rod mentioned, the larger the site, the easier it is to get to that. And as we mentioned earlier, right now we've got 18 acres of land in this R3 study area across 74 different properties. So the average property size is only 1/4 of an acre. So we really think that to create maximum efficiency for these new developments, some form of lot consolidation would be recommended. And so creating incentives to do that is might be an important part of a strategy to rezone the R3, if that's your wish. So with that, we can certainly open it up to questions. I know that as the city staff report indicates, staff is seeking your direction and potentially recommended amendments to the R3 multifamily zone to potentially accommodate the increased density. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen for the moment, but we can always come back to it, or at least I hope that we can, if I can figure out the technology.
Thank you very much. First, do we have consensus to receive and file, so I don't forget that again? So, all right, we have consensus. Item 1 is off the books. Okay, discussion. Do you want to lead us off, Councilmember Nickel?
I think it's crazy to think that this is my second to last meeting, and I think at my second meeting, sitting here, I asked for the R3 zone to be studied, so government efficiency at its best, right? The only thing that I think really jumps out, right? I know, like, density is a dirty word. It's a scary word. It's a word that has earned me plenty of negative praise on social media. The state is forcing density down our throats, so it's incumbent upon us to try to figure out where can density go. I mean, it's everything we talked about with the housing study that we approved earlier tonight, right? The housing element. But the only thing that I think strikes me as concerning in this is when we talk about, like, the R3 zone, because there is some random R3 properties in various locations throughout this town. I mean, if I told you that the 600 block of Penn Street, where you have multi-million-dollar homes and amazing views, there's 3 triplexes. So those are zoned R3, right? Technically, based upon this, somebody could, and with like certain approvals, somebody could buy all three, lot consolidate them, and then build to, you know, whatever, you know, unit per acre that we have on that site, and you now have a 5-story condominium building potentially on the 600 block of Penn Street, surrounded by R1s, right? And so like in everything that we talk about, I just really don't like it when it's like this zone, you know, like the R1, the R2, the R3 zone, just because there's such a mix of the zones. Like those triplexes on Penn Street, they have no business being there. Those are all single-family homes. How they became to be there, who knows, right? I mean, they clearly were allowed when they were built, right? But with that said, I think anything that you guys choose to do, because there's really nothing to do tonight, except give direction. And so the direction I would give is, originally I really wanted to study the feasibility of adding density east of like the power lines, east of Washington Park, you know? You know, I'll quote, there was a council candidate, John Pickhaver, he quoted me, and I love it, put density where density is. And it sounded really bad when he quoted me, and I love sound bites, right? So I just gave you another one. Put density where density is. It's terrible. And it sounded bad when he said it, and it made me reflect on how I said it and how I presented that information. And it wasn't meant to be in a negative manner. It was just meant to, how do we preserve the R1 zone? We preserve the R1 zone by creating the density the state wants in areas of our town where density already exists, where the people that live in those zones, it's a denser lifestyle. Therefore, if you add density there, it's not changing the lifestyle. Whereas if you add a 5-story condominium complex on, you know, the 600 block of Penn Street, that changes the lifestyle of the people that live around it, you know? And so I just think my recommendation to staff would be, don't just look at it with just a blanket R3 zone, but actually like areas within the R3 zone, you know, and if that means that, you know, that these areas where certain triplexes exist, but they're surrounded by R1s, that we rezone that all R1, and that's a legal non-conforming R3 zone, right? Which would not then, I guess, have the rights of the changes that we make. I'm not sure exactly how the legalities of that would work, but that would be my recommendation.
I think that 4 years ago, when we asked for this study, this is exactly the kind of information we wanted. Like, what's possible and what makes sense? You know, what's possible in the 100 block of Loma Vista, you know, there's some really old R3 spot right there. You know, what makes sense? And I think in this regard, looking at this, unless someone has a radically different view, I don't think a wall of condominiums is necessarily where we're going to go right now. But at least we know. Because before this, we didn't know. I mean, we didn't know what exactly the density matrix would to make this pencil out. So even if we presumed we're 25% or less, that still has to be triple the density it currently is. That lets us know what it takes. So if we are looking at development projects, or when we look at how are we going to allocate around RENA, say, well, what do we want it to look like, you know, in the 600 block of West Imperial, or in this case, you know, the 300 block of Indiana, or whatever it is. At least we have an idea. I don't know that any of us are going to be comfortable changing this zone tonight. I don't think that there is any, and I think that we have to really look at it. If it takes 85 feet of building to make some of these things work, then I think that's a hard conversation we're going to have with ourselves when we look at projects about where we put them. So I love this. I'm super glad we did it. I'm bummed it took 4 years, but that can happen. I know that you have something to add, but I think this is a receive and file into my cerebellum for me, but go ahead.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I may respond, and rather than waiting 4 years to address the comment, the intent of this study is to inform the overlay zone that was just adopted in the housing element. So if El Segundo TV can switch over to the PowerPoint presentation. I'm not exactly sure where on pen you're referencing.
It's not in that overlay zone.
Yeah,
but-
okay, so what we're talking about, if they are able to switch over, is the overlay zone that bordered Imperial down Washington, east of Washington, before PCH, and along
But
the
there was
southern portion
there was
of the ground.
there was overlay in, the 100 and 200 blocks of the southwest.
South of Franklin.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were some overlay areas there, and so this study is to inform that overlay. And tonight, we're looking to get direction on any other areas of concern to sort of pile on top of with the Planning Commission's feedback. And so Planning Commission said, look, if we're going to adopt this type of density, we want to make sure we preserve our development agreement rights. So scale the density that forces the trigger to maintain our development agreement rights so that we still have negotiating power. They asked us to prioritize building horizontally versus vertically. So as Darren was mentioning, requiring or encouraging lot consolidation to achieve higher densities allows us the flexibility of facilitating that density in a horizontal way rather than a vertical way. They also shared that a unit mix to regulate overall building massing. So if you regulate 1, 2, 3 bedroom unit sizes, you can force the envelope to shrink a little bit rather than somebody just building 2,500 square foot 2-bedroom apartments or condos. So you can establish a unit mix requirement to force that envelope to stay smaller. Requiring private open space to factor in proximity to public open space to help offset that open space requirement, lot coverage requirements, requiring lot consolidation, as we already talked about, and requiring varying heights depending on proximity to other uses. So if it's adjacent to a single-family residential area on the backside, requiring a step back or a vertical inclining plane at a horizontal angle to force that step back so that the massing is not a wall on the single-family residential. So that's just a basic summary of what the Planning Commission recommended. Tonight, what I'm looking for from council is, in addition to that, are there any other priority areas so that when we go and craft this for our housing element, what are the other areas that we're prioritizing or focusing on to make sure that we're maintaining the character of our residential neighborhoods without impacting or mitigating as much as possible the impacts.
Traffic.
Parking, traffic.
Yeah, not just parking, but having a way to exit. When you look at those things that are in the 100 and 200 block of Whiting over there, I mean, that could gridlock a quarter of the city if all of a sudden we're going to 70 units per acre. So, not so much on Imperial, but I would be very mindful of those. I know we're looking at making Franklin into more of a thoroughfare with the Smoky Hollow parking, so Franklin will be a bigger east-west vector, but just the sheer volume of cars we would be adding by adding that many units. So that would be something that I would bear in mind, please.
I know Pacific Coast Commons is a specific plan project, but I see that pretty much all of the properties that touch Pacific Coast Highway, the commercial properties that touch PCH, were not included in the overlay. Is there something that we can do with regards to some mixed use or something there? I think of, I always think of that B of A property, right, where the bank is. And I know there's a long-term lease there and they're not going anywhere anytime soon, but, it's like, there's no reason why a bank can't be on the ground level next to a cafe with housing units above.
Yeah, part of the reason why we didn't include properties immediately abutting PCH was because we wanted to preserve our development agreement rights. There's an avenue to still do that, maybe not through this process, but there's still an avenue to do that. We do need to take a look at all of our commercial corridors in the next 6 months because in the summer of 2023, state law goes into effect that provides by right development rights for residential, certain types of residential, and certain types of development arrangements. And so we need to look very quickly at that and tool up for that anyhow in the next 6 months. So it's something that we'll have to look at.
All right, do we have a motion to direct? Any further council comments?
Yeah, and just to.
Well, we direct them
Street
to,
environment.
what's that? We direct them with amendments for the multifamily zone, right?
Well, is there comfort level at us taking this another step and looking at developing standards that achieve some density within that range? I know in previous conversations, 75 units to the acre was a little high, but depending on, market's going to change in the next 10 years. And so maybe we start somewhere lower, or maybe we develop a graduating scale to get to that point, depending on where you are at geographically. And so we're really, I don't want to proceed any further until this body is comfortable with us taking this to that next step of analysis.
To Councilmember Nichols' point, all these are we're talking about the R3, but can we create like zones within the R3? So like, maybe not zones, but segments. So we can say for this segment of the R3, we're going to go here, but like on the pieces like the Penn Street, that right.
Sorry, the southwest corner of town.
So can we create like areas, like area A, area B, and have different?
Yeah.
I think that would be something we'd be.
Yeah, another way of doing that, because different areas might have different standards that make more sense. And so when we get there, I mean, we're talking about this conceptually, but another avenue would just be rezoning these blue hash to R4 and then having those overlays to have the different standards for different areas in the R4.
And
there's a lot of different ways we can carve it
to
up.
Councilmember Perstick's point, I mean, I think, what is it? The state says that people don't drive anymore, right?
Right.
And, it's all about public transit and things like that, but, the pragmatic person inside me is like, okay, well, if I'm the guy who doesn't need a car, doesn't want a car, and wants to take public transportation and the train, I'm likely gonna try to rent a place as close to the boulevard as humanly possible, right? So that I can get out my door straight out to PCH and catch the bus, or, walk, what is that? I mean, it's a quarter of a mile to the train from there, or potentially hop on a scooter or something and ride a quarter of a mile, more so than the person who's likely going to rent and want to dwell in that southwest corner is more likely to have some sort of mode of transportation to get to public transportation, right? So the parking requirement could differ from different pockets of town.
Right.
That's just the thought when we start thinking about, who the individuals are that are likely going to rent these areas. I mean, this is also something developers think about, right? And so those developers are also going to be taking that into consideration in those zones. I would say too, if I hope that the consensus is to have you to continue to look into this, because the housing element that we approved tonight is good for this cycle, and this cycle ends in which year?
2028.
2028. And that'll be here like this. And if our numbers were what they were this time, you can only imagine what they're going to be potentially next time, right? So being prepared versus chasing our tail and trying to figure out how to get HCD to accept something that we have. We have the study, we have the data, we understand. It's been, socialized throughout town, and people have had an opportunity to speak up and talk about like what they're okay with, what they're not okay with, things along those lines.
Yeah, if you, to add on to that, if you track the conversation with HCD without explicitly saying it, or explicitly saying it, HCD is headed towards the direction of unwinding the single-family residential zone. So if we do not offer an option that allows housing to be built in this next housing cycle, then their stick is going to be, it's going to hurt a lot worse than it did this cycle in addressing and demonstrating how we can build housing. And so this is a great first step. We shared it months ago that the housing conversation doesn't end with the adoption of the housing element. It's just the beginning of the next 7 years of us talking about it. And this is that first conversation for the next 7 years of arming ourselves so that when we go back to HCD in 2028, we have easy answers to give them. And so this is that first bite at that apple.
All right. Do we have a consensus for a motion to move ahead? Do we need to take a vote for that, or can we just?
I think that's sufficient.
Consents aye.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Rod, and Darren as well.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. And now we'll continue to deliberate on item 8.
Yes, I did.
Do you have the final results of our bullet bureau style, where we go into a room and?
I'm faster than the election counting. Okay, so,
Was that a zing? Do not zing the dais.
no, I said I'm faster than.
Zing the dais? We have two employees, you're one of them.
I said I'm faster than the election counting. It's not the, is that a, it's not a zing near you, is it? Okay, so, looking at the ordinance, what I've done is the first section, I'm adding a C to, or I'm proposing that we add section C to section 4, which would read, the council has determined that it is necessary to continue short-term home sharing pilot and temporary program for another 12 months for purposes of gathering additional information regarding the impacts of the program and to study the appropriate methods and penalties for individuals engaging in unlawful short-term rental activities in the residential areas of the city. So that sort of leads up then to what would be adopted. And then for section 5, we would put the deleted language in that section, because I'm looking at the red line, it's in the package, it was section E, which requires an acknowledgement that the use of the property for home sharing is subject to a sunset provision. That language would go back in. And then in section 6, a new section A would be added. What is currently A, which is at the bottom part of it, because the prior A had been deleted. The bottom language, which was not deleted, will be B, and above that A would read, the permits issued pursuant to 4-16-4 shall expire on December 31st, 2023, unless they are terminated earlier pursuant to 4-16-11, or for any failure to comply with applicable laws and regulations. Get rid of the word all there. And then for section 7, the 4-16-13 sunset provision, that language would go back in, except the wording which says or 15 months after it starts would be replaced with December 31st, 2023. And then finally for sections 10J, 11D, and 12H, there are, at the end of each of those, there is language that was struck out, and where that struck out language is, the following would be inserted. This subsection will automatically sunset on December 31st, 2023. So essentially these changes would extend this program as a pilot temporary program through the December 2023. And it would be just like you had it, or it was before, just with a different extension or ending date. So if that's acceptable.
And do you need to read this by title only?
I do.
Okay.
Sorry, if they can.
Are we comfortable with that push out? Okay.
So then I'm going to change this title slightly as I read it, which I didn't put on here, but I will just read it. An ordinance of the city of El Segundo amending Title 4, Chapter 16, Home Sharing Permit, and Title 15, Zoning Regulations of the El Segundo Municipal Code to extend the short-term home sharing rentals pilot program in the city's residential zones through a short-term home sharing permit. And then that would be ready for introduction.
Who will introduce the ordinance?
So moved.
And so this will then be brought back to the next council meeting for a potential second read and adoption.
All right, so yeah, that'll be December 6th. Okay, so endeth number 8. All right, we are on to committees, commissions, and boards. We'll announce the appointments to the Environmental Committee and Capital Improvement
Yes.
Advisory.
Yes, Council, this item does request that you announce appointments to the Environmental Committee and the Capital Improvement Program Advisory Committee. There are 5 appointments to each of these committees, and they are identified in the staff report.
I'm going to read them.
I'm happy to read them if you don't have them.
Pardon?
Okay.
All I have to do is read them, and they're right here. There's so much pressure. All right. For Environmental Committee, Dennis Falk, Tracy Miller-Zarnicki, Shannon O'Toole, Kevin Butler, and Kevin Atmore. And the Capital Improvement Advisory Committee, Jerome Scott, Eric Kari, Mike Rotolo, Leaf Johnson, and Connie Polino. My neighbor. Dennis, Tracy, and Shannon will be on full terms. Kevin and Kevin will be on partial terms. For capital improvement, the 2 full terms will be to Mr. Scott and Mr. Kari, and Mr. Rotolo, Mr. Johnson, and Connie will be the partial terms. There we go. Had one job. All of a sudden went from script to spreadsheet. Arts and sciences collide. Okay, reports, city clerk. Laughing it up over there. Tick, tick, tick.
Alrighty. There's an item under my name. Hold on one second. Let me pull it back up. All right. So this is the calendar for 2023. It would be your city council meeting calendar for 2023. And you have 3 options, A, B, or C.
Can I make a motion that we approve option C? Yes. It's perfect. I have no objections to it at all.
I'll second that, Boyles.
Came out of the woodwork.
All right, we have a motion with a second for option C on the calendar. That is on the floor. Madam Clerk, we'll take a voice vote.
I can do that. Councilmember Giroux.
No.
Councilmember Nickel.
Aye.
Councilmember Perset.
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
And Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
It passes 3-2.
Can I suggest in the future we discuss those? Well, Robert's Rules of Orders, they motioned and seconded.
There's zero discussion on that entire thing. We just cut out 3 meetings. We just cut out out of 24 we have in a year. We just cut out 3 of them.
We can call them back. It's just a matter for staff scheduling.
What's wrong with scheduling and deciding whether or not there's enough on the agenda to cancel them? Because you're literally going again a 60-day off period between the June 15th meeting and the end of August at 60 days again, which means we're going to jam everything in on June 1st and everything in September, and we end up here at 11 o'clock, and at the end of the agenda, we're too tired to go through any of this stuff, and stuff gets missed.
City Manager, I would put that, I would take that as a point of order, that if there's items on there as we look at the staff calendar and we need to re-add a meeting, that's something that we can certainly revisit.
Okay. We'll do that.
And it seems like that may be worth revisiting. All right, reports. City Treasurer, not here. Councilmember Drew.
Nothing.
Councilmember Nickel.
I'll pass.
Councilmember Pierstick.
Yeah, I wanted to reiterate, at the last council meeting, I made a very strong plea that we hire a project manager for the park redevelopment, and I want to make sure I reiterate that one more time, in that there's a lot going on with our Parks and Recs, and we have the plunge redesign, we have the soccer, the field, the irrigation redesign, which is going to take a lot of effort to schedule and come up with a concept and plan. And then on top of that, we have the teen center and the skate park. Those initiatives, I believe, are require a skill set that we may not have. We may have that skill set, but we don't have someone dedicated to just go on to those projects. So I'm going to make a plea to the city and to the council that we separate those 3 projects and hire one consulting firm to come in and manage those projects. Because to Council Members Nichols' point, I've been talking about the teen center for 6 years, and I want it done before I leave in 8 years. So I really want to make sure that we move this forward, and that we've been funding it, and nothing's happened. And I just want to make sure that I'm very clear that those projects get a project manager and we manage them effectively and efficiently so we can get all those trees done.
Yes, if the council wishes to discuss, absolutely, but and as a result of the last meeting, I did get that message, and I've already discussed that with our Parks and Rec director, and we'll be looking into bringing something back to the council if that's your desire.
Because, you know, we have funds, we have the park fee funds that are coming in. They're supposed to go to the park. We have put aside money in our budget for the Parks and Recs, especially specifically for the teen center. We've prioritized the teen center and the skate park. The plunge money, we're in the process of that money is being allocated, and I want to make sure that we are moving forward at full speed on all three of those projects. And to your point, Scott's point earlier, you know, the irrigation at the fields is not up, there's no sensors because it's flooding. We need to really make sure that those three initiatives are managed effectively. All right, and then I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving.
For my comments, City Manager, I think that we need to revisit as a council a letter to the County Board of Supervisors, or specific to either to our supervisors or maybe both to supervisors and Metro about land banking. There's an important proposition about land banking and how that is run at the county level. And our former supervisor, Hahn, has a motion that would have land banked by Metro's lead agency, which I don't think Metro really wants to do, or the county. Any of that land that would be developed that's within a city would have to be done in coordination with that city. There is a competing measure that would say they just have to let the city know when they can do what they will with that land. So I think to that, I think it's important that we issue that letter, and we're going to be chasing it a bit because the supervisors just had their meeting and they'll have one more. But I think that is important because that's something that could be a notable surprise if they have land within our city and decide to develop it as they will. Sanitation tomorrow, will there be updates on a lawsuit? We had transportation yesterday. Of note to all of us, the 710 freeway, which Measure R&M had money passed, and those ballot measures were passed to tax your sales tax on the back of improving the safe movement of goods and people at the 710 corridor. That is no longer going to happen. They've no longer decided to increase flow on that. They've decided to use that money as part of a larger community development along the 710 corridor that does not have anything to do with the safe movement of people and goods. What that does not account for yet is how the ever-increasing flow of trucks will somehow get out of the ports. That will likely impact the 405 South, it'll affect the 91, it'll affect the 605 a lot. So you'll start to hear things regionally about what the effects around this. It has a lot to do with how we work with our neighboring regions, but it will affect us as we try to go east. Now, if you try and go east from here and those parallel east-west routes are clogged, it's because those trucks have nowhere to go. And as the EIRs for that were last done in 2016, I think we can agree that we do shopping a lot different than we did in 2016. There's just a lot more trucks. So that is one of those things that when people have frustration about traffic getting around, that is one of those things that very subtly will likely impact that. And our city at some point will be asked to weigh in as the regions decide on what to do with that. And I'm sure I had some other great idea, but I don't remember what it was. So, Mr. Mayor, any comments?
Just really quickly, Thursday last week was a great day. We had the Salute to Military event at the Aerospace Corporation in conjunction with the Chamber. Chamber led the event. They did a tremendous job saluting military, past, present, and the future, and it was great. And then we capped off Thursday with winning the LA EDC Most Business Friendly Award, which is amazing, and really an incredible culmination of all of our staff's work. Barbara, I see you there. Great job to you and to Daryl and Christina Revelis and everybody. El Segundo TV, everybody in El Segundo deserves accolades. It's a huge accomplishment, another feather in the cap as we talk about being the most important 5 square miles economically in Southern California. And they have certainly been hearing us and seeing everything that we've done, our staff's done to support the business community. So, job well done. That's all I have. Thank you.
And with that, Mr. Mayor, before we adjourn, can I recommend that we adjourn in memory of Bill Bew, former mayor, inveterate dog walker, great conversationalist. Daryl, did you have anything? Sorry, I think I cut you off right there.
I know it's getting late here, but I did have a brief report on updates to the Hyperion, both the perimeter road and the water treatment plant, if you'd like to hear that.
Please do.
Okay. Just real quick on the, regarding the perimeter road project, at this point, the total project's about 64% complete, and the sheet piles, which have been the biggest concern, it's about 78% complete right now, and it's anticipated that that entire piling work will be done by the end of December. So I know there's been issues regarding that, regarding noise and vibration. They have assured us that they're doing constant checking of the decibels and the vibration levels, and they're reporting that to us as we go on. They've also, the contract has included additional acoustic noise barriers that have been delivered to the site and installed to hopefully mitigate some of the construction noise. And also, regarding the dust and noise mitigation measures have also been implemented at the construction site and will be ongoing out through the remainder of the project. And as you know, as I reported last time, this continues to be the case, that they've transitioned now to install these sheet piles using smaller equipment than the larger equipment, and we're hoping that that has offset some of the intense noise and vibration. Regarding the water treatment plant, as a result of one of the AQMD abatement requests or citations, Hyperion has set up a 24-hour hotline for any odor-related issues. That number is 310-318-8232. Again, it's 310-318-8232. Was set up on November 7th. We've posted the phone number to make those reports on our website. Hyperion did host its second task force meeting this past week, further refining their emergency response and communications protocol. Our new communications manager has been attending those meetings, along with leaders from the Sanitation District, the City of LA, LA Public Health, LA Beaches and Harbors, LAFD, LA County Fire Department, Cal OES, and the Office of Emergency Management. So there's a separate committee now that's been set up for kind of the larger emergency potential. Hyperion also did retain 2 consultants. They hired them on September 18th for the assessments and studies on odor generation, which is another part of the AQMD abatement order. 2 of these companies, Trussell Technologies, will work on the evaluation of various plant processes and odor control within the facility, and York Engineering will evaluate the meteorological data in relation to the odor dispersion. So those 2 consultants have been hired. Hyperion also did a presentation and tour on November 10th, where I believe Councilwoman Perstick did attend. There were roughly 25 other individuals that attended this tour. Hyperion also, and you may have read this in the Daily Breeze, plans to test its 1-mile outfall this week, and that's something that they'll be undertaking. And then finally, another AQMD hearing board meeting was held on November 3rd, and Hyperion provided an update regarding their efforts as related to the existing 6 flares at the site. The update was recorded, and the link of this recording is also posted on our website. That concludes my report on the status of Hyperion.
Thank you very much. And with that in mind, once again, we'll adjourn in the memory of Bill Bew, former mayor.